All right, let's go ahead and get started. Today is December 13th, 2017. It is 3:12. We are in the City Council chambers here at 301 West 2nd Street, Austin, Texas. This special called meeting is for the purpose of discussing and taking action with respect to the proposed meet and confer agreement between the City of Austin and the Austin Police Association. We're going to start today with the manager wants to address us. And then I'm going to ask our staff to make its presentation. And we'll give the council the chance to ask questions at that point if they want to. You won't be precluded from asking the staff questions if you want to hold questions or ask additional questions at any other time. But certainly if there are threshold questions that people want to ask, we can do that. I'll then come back to the dais in case anyone wants to say anything from the dais before we go to public testimony. And then we'll go to public testimony. Our rules say that on something that is significant like this, with a lot of people signed up, and we have nearly 150 people signed up to speak on this issue thus far, I expect that number to rise. That the first 20 people that speak for 3 minutes. Everyone speaks after that speaks for 1 minute. If somebody is, what we said we were going to do was to basically have a conversation, public testimony, both this afternoon and then also after dinner, so that people who could only come one time or the other could speak. And we said we would give those preferred 3-minute slots. We would evenly divide those between this afternoon and this evening, which means the first 10 people that speak this afternoon will have 3 minutes. The first 10 people this evening will have 3 minutes. And as is our custom, we're going to divide those speaking opportunities equally between the people who are for and the people who are against. We have been contacted by what seem to be the most significant stakeholder groups, both for and against. And they've given me a list of 5 names, and I will call those 5 people in each of those groups. And certainly people can donate time if they want to donate their time. And with that said, then, if there are no objections, we'll go ahead and start. Okay, Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and council members and citizens, thank you for being here this afternoon. We appreciate your attendance and your attention. Staff has prepared a briefing for council and the public on our police labor meet and confer contract agreement today. Before the presentation, I want to acknowledge the work of our negotiating teams on both sides of the table. I especially appreciate the collaboration of Assistant City Managers Ray Ariano and Mark Washington, who assisted me in managing this process. My sincere thanks go to Larry Watts, along with our outside counsel, Lowell Denton, who together led the city's negotiating team. I also want to thank our law department staff, attorneys Lee Crawford and Mike Kronig, who also provided great assistance and legal advice to me, as well as the rest of the staff. I also want to express thanks to management staff of the Labor Relations Office, the Police Monitor's Office, the Police Department, as well as Financial Services and Human Resources for their assistance in this process. As you can see, we had a lot of staff on this significant effort. I also want to acknowledge the leadership of Ken Cassidy, who's president of the Austin Police Association, for his participation in this process. And finally, I want to acknowledge the employees of our police department who provide exceptional public service every day for our community on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis. I join with our community in thanking you for your service and your dedication to keeping Austinites, their families, visitors, and the Austin community safe. Lowell Denton, if you would come up. He is our outside counsel, and he will begin the presentation. If you could cue up the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Your Honor, members of the City Council, it's my privilege to go through this contract with you today and lay out what we are bringing to you and what the basis for this proposal for your considerate action today. Local Government Chapter 143 is the State Civil Service Act. It applies to all civil service cities like yours, both for your fire and police departments. It establishes the civil service personnel system. It's been in effect in Texas for decades, and as a result, some aspects of it are frankly quite out of date, and they are certainly not a good match for your culture in your community. And for that reason, the statute, Chapter 143, allows the city and the APA to enter into a meet and confer agreement, not just to decide wages, terms and conditions of employment, leave benefits, and so forth and so on, what we refer to as the dollars in this deal, but it also allows us to bargain to change the structure of Chapter 143, the laws and rules that concern hiring, promotions, discipline, including access to investigative information about officer conduct and misconduct, and other terms and conditions of employment. And I emphasize that because state law is the source of the limitations that we have been bargaining about in order to give your community access to and an appropriate oversight role and responsibility in the exercise of the policing function in your community. The city's objective has been to negotiate wages and other terms and conditions of employment that are advantageous to the city and its citizens. Obviously, that means to hire competitively the best police officers in the state. That is getting to be more and more a challenge. I noticed yesterday extensive coverage about the challenges the city of Dallas is having hiring to fill its vacancies and shortages, and that's certainly true here. This meet and confer agreement must be ratified by a majority vote of the APA membership and the City Council, and that brings us to today's discussion. The negotiating teams began this process in May of 2017. I think this is probably one of the shorter cycles where we have come before you in a reasonable period of time. We've spent about 7 months doing this. Our tentative agreement was reached in October at the end of the month. The proposed 5-year agreement will be effective on the date you ratify it, if you do ratify it today, and expiring on September the 30th in 2022. A majority of the APA membership voted 85% to approve the tentative agreement last month on November the 18th. So it's presented today for your consideration and ratification. The city's objectives for this negotiating cycle that were laid out after public comment and feedback to this council and then your direction to the manager and her bargaining team was to reset base wages to bring APD closer to alignment with the city's list of comparable large Texas cities in terms of pay and benefits. Over a number of years, we had bargained with the APA and the Austin firefighters with the expectation that Austin needed to be the leader in the compensation and benefits market. But as you all know from the information that was made available earlier this year and probably at the end of last year, we had continued to outpace that market and had gotten too far ahead of other public safety agencies in the state of Texas. As a result of that, the objective this time, which we made clear from the very first negotiating session, was to reset base wages and to dial back, if you will, the level of compensation and benefits so that we still were attractive, so that people came looking for police employment in the state of Texas. They would still have Austin at the top of their list, but that we would not be so far ahead of number 2. We also wanted to gain more control over APD overtime costs. We wanted to enhance civilian oversight of the APD, which has been a continuing evolution from the very beginning, from the original POFG committee that came forward and established citizen oversight in Austin, and it is the only citizen oversight model in the state of Texas. There are some other cities that have limited citizen participation on a disciplinary review board that advise the chief about discipline, but nothing remotely similar to what the city of Austin has had or the proposal with the negotiated enhancements that are in this contract. Lastly, we wanted to retain and build on the other negotiated variances and changes to Chapter 143 that allow us to have optimum hiring, promotion, and disciplinary processes. The tentative agreement that you have before you meets these objectives in oversight. First of all, verbal, written, and anonymous complaints are now accepted. That's a change to Chapter 143. And if we weren't under 143, other Texas cities are covered by Chapter 614 in the Local Government Code, which has similar requirements for all other Texas cities. Those requirements that individuals have to show up at the police department, which may be an intimidating environment, be interviewed, sign under oath a complaint, provide that information freely and openly to the public, have long been a disincentive for members of the community to tell what they believe to be the truth about police officer conduct. Best practices police departments have recognized years ago that we need to be looking for information about how our police officers are doing and not trying to hide from or avoid that feedback from our community. And so now we can have individuals that make these kinds of complaints. Your police monitor, your police chief, your police command staff can evaluate whether or not they are significant enough to deserve further investigation. The police monitor can now initiate a complaint based on information. That's also a change from state law. Complainants are not required to make a sworn complaint under oath anymore. If you're familiar with the consent decrees in cities throughout the United States, every one of them that confronted an organization that had this requirement. So if I have a problem with the police, I show up and they hand me a piece of paper and it said, warning, if you put a false statement on here under oath, you may be charged with a felony of aggravated perjury. Well, that's kind of a disincentive for me coming forward with what I believe to be the truth. So complainants are not required now under this contract to make a sworn complaint, even though that is a part of 143 and it's also a part of Chapter 614. We have expanded to a broader role for the Citizen Review Panel to recommend changes to the police chief on training and procedure issues. Members of the CRP can now observe the subject officer's internal affairs interview from an adjoining room. That's a change from 143, but it's also an enhancement from the prior contracts. Your panel members have now for years been able to listen to the audio transcripts of witness and officer interviews. But that's not the same thing. And as many of you know, if I listen to that discussion, I can't see the expressions, I can't perceive the pauses, I can't really get a true impression about the interchange between the investigator and the officer. This allows your panel members to get a good feel from whether or not your internal affairs personnel are truly objectively interviewing officers and trying to find the truth, so that they can form their own firsthand impression, both visually and empirically, about whether or not this is a fair and objective process, as opposed to what is sometimes perceived as collaboration between two people in blue that are trying to come up with a story that is favorable to the police department. Your CRP members and the panel can obtain more information and may now ask questions of the complainant and the fact witnesses during public portions of the meeting. So we have moved in this contract toward more engagement and more involvement and more verification of the factual information that are available to the panel members. And of course, the information from the investigations themselves, which are largely unlimited because the chief can require officers to provide any information and can obtain any information about the officer's conduct or misconduct, so that that's a part of the internal affairs file. But for this contract, these citizen members would not have access to that information under 143.089G of this statute. The additional changes to the panel involve greater access to their recommendations, including the police chief's response, so that the public will have more transparency about the interplay between what the panel believes is working effectively and well. And that's true even if the officer does not receive discipline. But we have provided that the identifying information regarding particular officer investigations gets redacted, but the substance of the recommendations by the panel to the chief and the chief's response are open. Police monitor can now give more information to the complainant in the closeout meeting. That was a high priority. We think that, and we have bargained for that actually in prior cycles, because if people don't see and understand and get a good explanation of what happened in response to their complaint, what the facts revealed, what action was taken, why or why not, then people don't have confidence in the process. The police monitor can now present cases to the panel without a request from the complainant, so that your professional staff in the monitor's office, answerable to your city manager under this structure and under your charter, can make sure that they are aggressively pursuing improvement in the Austin Police Department. We've also added term limits for CRP members, 2-year terms with a maximum of 2 terms, so that you will have opportunities for new people to come onto that board and to participate in the process and to expand the level of inclusivity in your community in this important tool. These objectives, unfortunately, were not met in this cycle. We negotiated for subpoena power for the review panel or the police monitor from the outset. We made that clear from the very beginning of this bargaining cycle. We were unable to achieve that objective in a contract change. We proposed to expand the types of cases where the panel could recommend discipline to the chief. That provision is not in this agreement. We also sought to allow release of subject officers' internal affairs interview in critical incidents, even if no discipline is imposed. And I think you all understand this, but so that everybody does and the community understands it, under 143.089G, unless discipline is imposed, that material is not public and it's a prohibited release under the law. And so we believed and we bargained for, and we seriously bargained for each of the issues on this over a period of a number of months. And again, the third bullet there, to allow release of that information, is not a part of this labor agreement. Some of the things I've already reviewed with you were the alternatives to that in terms of panel recommendations, the police monitor being able to initiate complaints and so forth. Loss of promotional points for prior suspensions. We sought from the association the ability to change the formula so that when you are competing for promotion in the process in the contract, that you would lose promotional advantage points as a result of prior disciplinary actions. We were not able to accomplish that. But I do want for everybody to understand that under the statute itself, the chief already has the authority to bypass officers, pardon me, and the disciplinary history of an officer is a valid reason for a bypass. We believe that that provision, effectively used by your command staff, will be able to accomplish this objective independently of the formula change. The association also proposed to put a written rebuttal on their part into the police monitor's annual report. We resisted that, and it is not a part of this labor agreement. So on the discipline issue, we met the objective of extending the 180-day deadline for imposing disciplinary action. This applies to alleged criminal conduct. The statute has language in it, and has for many years, that the chief has to bring action within 180 days unless it relates to criminal activity, in which event the chief can bring his action within 180 days of discovery. There are multiple problems with that provision in the statute. It's not been effectively used by many cities in the state because of those problems. You have to show that it's related to criminal activity. Inevitably, the association's lawyers for the officer argue that that means you have to prove a criminal standard or have a higher burden of proof. In addition to that, they claim that discovery means, well, somebody knew about it. The sergeant saw the report. They heard from the citizen about it. The sergeant works for the police department. That knowledge is attributed to the police department, and so you did know about it. All of that set of problems have now been resolved in this article. Only knowledge by the assistant chief or the chief counts for purposes of the discovery rule. The city does not have to prove a criminal state of mind or use the criminal law standard of proof, so we have a normal disciplinary case that can be brought within 180 days of discovery at the assistant chief or chief's level. In addition, we added a provision concerning suspensions of 3 days or less. There has been legitimate nationwide concern about contract provisions that minimize an officer's prior behavior for future disciplinary actions. The article that's in the contract and the provision in the contract was never intended to have that effect, and we don't believe that it has. But to make sure that there are not situations where reduction to a written reprimand happens for things that are critical to the relationship with the public, it doesn't apply to response to resistance, which is the policy name for your use of force, or bias-based policing policies. So we think that's an improvement. And probably more importantly than anything else for the community, the chief is not going to and shouldn't, and I believe won't, impose 3-day or less suspensions for things that are not appropriate for a reduction to a written reprimand to happen to that officer in the future, because he has the discretion to impose 4 days and the provision has no application at all. Now, moving on to the promotions article in the contract, this article essentially retains the following rights that have been there, all except one of the things on this bullet point list have been in prior labor agreements. 4 years continuous service in a police officer, that would just be 2 years under state law. So this means more time, experience, and so forth in order to be able to promote. A maximum of 15 points added for seniority. Time and rank, where we have, that's the new provision, where we have a maximum of 7 points for time and rank. We did a pretty extensive study by looking at history of promotions under this contract, the prior contract, and the one before that to see how our point balancing was affecting the promotional opportunities within the department so that we had full, adequate, across-the-board opportunity for promotion in the department and that there was not disparate impact in that process. That was the reason that we put a 7-point maximum on for time and rank. Education points, we have a maximum of 2 points added to the test score. The assessment center provisions are carried forward from prior agreements. Our promotional eligibility list, valid for 24 months instead of the state law 1 year, means that more people can get reached on those lists. The lists that we're talking about are highly competitive, going farther down the list into the 16th, 18th, 19th, 20th month, and so forth is an advantage, and it gives more opportunity to individuals to compete for those promotions. When you go on a reinstatement list, normally under the statute, that reinstatement list would expire after a year. We have removed that limitation. So if you promote and you get bumped back on a disciplinary suspension, then you stay on that list without an expiration period. The hiring article is one of the most important and I think most successful articles. I think the Austin Police Agreement has the best hiring article that's been negotiated in the state of Texas. And I'm pleased to have been involved in doing that. I'm especially pleased that I negotiated it against Mr. Watts many years ago. And it gives the Austin Police Association the maximum amount of flexibility to hire personnel into this department, which allows you to fill the vacancies that you have and also allows for you to make sure that there is full and adequate opportunity for all sectors of your community, race, gender, ethnicity, culture, and so forth, and that there are not advantages either to legacy hires or to people on the basis of disparate impact from race or position. So this hiring article maintains each of the things that are there. Those were previously here. There are no changes in that article in the contract. We have a state-of-the-art drug testing article, which is strongly supported by the APA. I do give them credit for supporting this and being in favor of this in years past and in this year. We include testing for steroids. That's been done before, but that's been made explicit. We have also added to this contract a memoranda of understanding on two things that were complex, problematic, and had the potential to get in the way of our other priorities in this cycle. Phase down is a process that comes from the city of Houston, which adopted it years ago because they had, from time to time, very, very large separation pay costs, where you had a lot of people retiring, leaving the department, and the city had to write checks for all those people for huge leave balances. So they came up with a transitional process allowing them to spread those budgetary impacts over multiple fiscal cycles. The association brought that to us this year. We began a review of it. We had communications with Houston to look at the pros and cons. We believe that there are potential advantages for the city of Austin, And since we could not get those problems identified, solved, and write an article that captured that contract relationship, we are proposing to have this memorandum of understanding, do a study. If a positive recommendation is made to the city manager from the committee, then within the first 3 years, the parties will reopen to consider including the phase-down model. The last piece was on the diversity enhancement in the department. The association raised the issue of making Austin a leader in having special leave available for work-life issues. Primarily, this is a gender-inclusive issue, especially for individuals that come in that are female police officers that contemplate childbearing years and the need to be absent from the workforce for a period of time. Police organizations have not been female-friendly in the past, but it also has application to male employees who have work-life challenges or who have health challenges that are nevertheless valuable police officers and should be able to extend their career. We have agreed to study that during the contract, but we don't have a requirement to reopen negotiations on that particular provision. So, how did we do? Did we meet our objectives? First of all, on wages. Currently, APD base wage, based on our study, is 13.6% above the next highest maximum, or the number 2 that I referred to earlier. Under this agreement, we have slowed that wage growth. We have brought it down in spite of the fact that we have included some new incentives that we think provide additional value, projecting that to be 10.7% above the next highest maximum rate at the end of the 5-year agreement. Now, that's based on a projection. It's a calculation of what we will be paying, and it is a projection for what our other comparable cities would be paying based on either existing contracts or what their history has been under their prior agreements.
Excuse me, Mayor. I understand there's an issue outside where people can't hear. I'm wondering if it would be possible for non-essential staff who are in the room to leave so some of those people can hear. They're not able to hear the presentation.
Can we ask about that? I understand the fire chief has said that the room is full. We have the monitors that are out in the atrium. Is there no sound to the monitors that are in the atrium?
They're working on it, and they just opened the Boards and Commissions room as well.
They're in the Boards and Commission room?
They opened that, and they're working on the sound out here.
Can the people who are not, can everyone at this point fit into the Boards and Commission room?
There's still going to be a lot of people out.
There's still a lot of people that can't hear. So the request was that non-essential staff related to this give up space for people in the community to hear. Manager, are you comfortable with that?
I would ask that non-essential staff that are not supporting this presentation go back to the bullpen to listen until there's sufficient room back in the chambers. It looks like we've got a few.
Okay, we've done that. As people go out, they'll be able to come back in.
Yeah. The other thing is, if people could move towards the middle of the aisle, then we can see how many open seats there are. People want to sit.
Huh? It's the number of people. I'm not sure. And the fire chief's been keying off the number of people.
Bodies.
And there may be a meeting that's scheduled at 4 in the Boards and Commissions room as well.
Hopefully they'll get the sound turned back on in the atrium. You want to go ahead and proceed?
Thank you, Your Honor. The increase in base wages in this labor agreement is 1% in the first year, 1% in the second year, 2% in the third, 2.5% in the fourth, and 3% in the fifth. The first year, of course, is a short fiscal year, and you'll see that reflected on the wage calculation chart to follow. We have also added in this contract patrol assignment pay. This assignment pay is for officers, corporals, and sergeants that are assigned to patrol and have been for a minimum of 4 years. The objective here continues an objective that we bargained for in years past, because historically in most police departments, your career path was you weren't going to get a significant pay raise unless you promoted to the next rank. And if you promoted from a patrolman position to a detective, that sent you to an office, took you out of patrol, you weren't in a squad car, you weren't doing calls for service, you were in another role. and then you promoted later on to a higher rank. And so you had people that were going back out to supervise patrol people in a sergeant's job that hadn't even been in patrol for years. This is a tool that has been employed in other communities. We took a very careful look at this. We looked at the market, and we are proposing in this agreement, and we think that it will give value to the contract and to these personnel to incentivize people staying in a patrol position. $200 a month starting in the 18-19 fiscal year, the following year to $250, up to $300, and up to $350 in the last year of the labor agreement. The ratification incentive is a one-time payment of $1,000 per employee. That's upon ratification of the tentative agreement if the council approves it. That was included in order to take into account the fact that this is a short fiscal year, that the 1% pay raise that's included in this labor agreement does not result in 1% of additional pay into police officer pockets. And there's an advantage, frankly, to the city of doing it this way because this $1,000 is not a part of the pay base in future years. So it actually saves money in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. Under overtime pay, vacation leave no longer counts as work time in calculating overtime pay. That was one of the fundamental points of direction or insistence from this council. Austin had been counting vacation leave as productive time credit so that you could be out for a week and then come in and work an overtime shift and get paid as if you had been at work all week. That goes away. That's a first-year savings, and it will be reflected in the calculation of the cost of the contract that you'll see shortly. The police chief may nevertheless allow vacation time to be counted under the past practice under specific circumstances, namely if we're having challenges in filling overtime slots for special events and other kinds of police needs. On other pay items, there's no change to longevity pay, FTO pay, shift differential, bilingual pay, education or certificate or mental health officer pay. So we kept those flat. We believe that they are in line with, they're not identical with, but they're in line with other pays of those types and other police labor agreements around the state. We may be a little higher, we may be a little lower on one or the other. We have adjusted the schedule eligibility for shift differential pay so that 28-day cycles from 2 p.m. to 12 p.m. if 50% or more of the shift begins after 12. That means the chief has the discretion to set the schedule and to determine whether or not the shift differential will apply. On holiday pay, we have added a Thanksgiving holiday stipend of 1.5 times regular wages, and that cost is included in the calculation. Under retirement, there's no increase in the city's contribution rate. Your retirement situation is sound. That was really not an issue for this bargaining cycle. And overtime, we retain the overtime exemption under state law for lieutenants and commanders, which was bargained in years ago when the city bargained to change the salaries for those individuals and to make them exempt from overtime because many of these individuals work lots and lots of hours of overtime and they get paid a salary that covers all of those hours. This is the sheet showing the overall cost calculation for the agreement in summary terms. For your short fiscal cycle of 17 through 18, you have your 1% base wage, which is a partial year cost of $1,079,000. The ratification incentive, which is the $1,000 payment, and then the savings that you have from the non-productive vacation time. In your next fiscal year, the year to come, 18-19, second year of the contract, and the first full year of the contract, you have the full annualized cost of the 1% base wage. And what that means is that you have the additional dollars that you have to pay on top of the base wage that you have for the prior year, because all the base wages are cumulative and they stack on top of each other. Then you have the first year patrol increment pay at $200, which is $1,444,000. On Thanksgiving Day, that additional 1.5 is $100,000, and the 1% base wage for the full year with a cost of $2,179,000. The numbers get simpler from that point forward because each of these are just full fiscal cycles with your base wage cost and your patrol pay cost increment for each of those, showing a 5-year total cost of pay enhancements of $57.7 million. And then, and I think everybody understands this, Your existing step pay program doesn't change. We negotiated no enhancement or changes. You have existing step pay increments where, for a period of seniority in the department, your pay goes up at an incremental level. That stays the same, but you have to take the cost to know what it's going to cost you for the full 5 years for that step pay program that's already in existence today. That's the $22.5 million for a total of $80 million. So the next question is, what happens if this agreement is not ratified? And I will summarize these, and certainly we can answer any questions about specifics or particulars. Under hiring, as I indicated, you would lose the highly advantageous hiring article. Chapter 143 has an entirely antiquated process of showing up with everybody in the same room at the same time, taking a 100-question test, getting a score on that test, being ranked solely on the outcome from that written examination. There would be no modified or lateral hiring process. We can't go to another police department, find somebody that's been there 6 years, bring them in here, and get an early head start on them going on the street because of that experience. We just have to hire whoever shows up and takes the test. Obviously, we can't be especially competitive if we're hiring people at initial entry positions and putting everybody through the same identical training academy. So a significant setback on the hiring of personnel, in addition to the very large percentage for disparate impact for re-implementing that kind of an examination, which historically here and everywhere is not consistent with a diverse workforce. On promotions also could only be based on written test scores. It's a similar statutory process where you show up, you take a simple written test, you get a score, you get promoted on that basis. The sole exception is the bypass rule that I mentioned to you earlier, where you can pick 1, 2, or 3, but then whoever you don't pick goes back on the list and they're still there and then the next person on the list. So that doesn't give us the advantages that we believe our current carefully crafted promotional scoring system has given us in terms of the opportunity to have a diverse group of individuals promoting through the ranks of the APD. Assessment centers or technical skills evaluations can't be used because you would be limited to the written test. Under citizen oversight, well, immediately you go back to the provision 143.089G that unless you have discipline of an officer, none of that information is available to the public. It's all non-disclosure. That's the state law. We're stuck with it for whatever the time period is that we don't have a labor agreement. So the panel would lose access to any of that confidential information. The negotiated changes I explained about the 180-day rule on discovery of misconduct would not be effective, and we'd be stuck with the old rule that's in effect today. Under wages and benefits, management would be able to reduce or eliminate additional pays that are not currently set by ordinance. You only have 2 ordinances, I believe, right now for bilingual pay and FTO pay. And so you would retain control of those wages and benefits on a go-forward basis. And I will turn it over either for questions, Madam Manager, or to Chief Manley.
Councilmember Alter.
I wanted to ask if you could explain a couple other pieces that were not presented, because I think some folks may be new to this discussion. So if you can explain the step pay process, you noted it was the 22-some odd million
Yes.
there. If you can explain that, because as presented, it looks like they're just getting the base pay increases each year.
Certainly. I'll be glad to do that. To fully understand it, you have to put in front of yourself a copy of the step pay plan that has the charts and the columns and so forth. But in simple terms, what it means is that built into the career compensation for your police and firefighters and EMS personnel are increments that are based on their time in service. And so when you come in at the beginning of your career, you get an increase that's automatic after you've been in for a year. And then you get another increase after you've been in for 2 years. And then you don't get one until a later year. And then you skip a year or two and you get another one either at your 7th year or whatever. And every one of those pay plans is different. And when you get to the year where you have the next increment, you're going to get either a 3 or a 3.5 or a 4 or a 5% increment in pay, in addition to whatever the base pay change would be for that year. So, for instance, in some of our prior contracts here where we had a 0 wage increase, everybody still got their step increases under the step pay plan, even in the year that there was a 0 base pay increase. And so for individuals that meet their next step increase during year 1 of this contract, they will get a 1% base increase plus whatever the relevant step interval is. So if it's 4%, they'll get 4% plus the 1%.
Would it be possible for you to be more precise? I don't really remember too many that are at 4%.
I'm sorry?
Can you be more precise about the steps percentages?
I can't tell you off the top of my head what the years of service are and what the percentages are for each of those steps. I don't know.
Maybe at some point we can have that presented to us.
Because when I'm trying to get that answer, I just look it up. So that's not something I have memorized.
I understand that you don't have it memorized, but
Okay.
I think in order for the public to understand what
understand.
What the decision is before
Yeah.
us, I think that's
It's easy to
important.
access.
Thank you. If
Yes.
that would be possible for us at some point to see that. And then the other piece that I wanted you to discuss, which I didn't hear, was the specialty pays. I think there are 12 of them, including longevity pay. So if you could detail for people what those are, and also maybe show us where they're appearing in the amounts, because you said it was new enhancements, and some of those are
None of
ongoing.
those pays on that list have changed. Can we
But
have
are they calculated in the
can we have the
57.5,
presentation
or
back
where
up?
are they accounted for?
So you'll see here on this slide number 14 that there's no change to longevity. The statute has a provision for longevity pay so that you get a certain number of dollars for every year that you have in service. Austin pays a higher amount for longevity pay, but we have made no change in this contract to the current level of longevity pay. FTO pay means that we're paying people extra to serve as a field training officer for individuals that are training new officers coming onto the force. So they get a stipend in addition to their regular pay for being a field training officer. Shift differential is paid to people who work the late shifts, and is common in police departments to compensate people for working the less advantageous, higher or more intense calls for service. If you're working in the early part of the day, you may not have as busy a day as if you're working at the nighttime when all the bars are closing and there are more problems and there's more calls for service. And that is the reason that shift differentials were developed in police departments. So we don't change shift differential, we maintain what we had before. Bilingual pay obviously is an incentive to pay people extra so that we have individuals in multiple languages that have taken language tests and have the capacity to communicate with members of the public that may not be proficient in the English language. Education and certificate pay are created to incentivize officers continuing their education to obtain degrees. Certificate pay is for certification by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, where they certify officers at the beginner, intermediate, and master peace officer level, and we pay separate amounts which don't change under this contract for each of those certificates. And then mental health officer pay for individuals that have the special certification, not the basic level of mental health that everybody has when they go through the academy, but that have the higher certification for mental health officers.
I would ask the city manager if we could make sure that we have that up on the screen, the actual amounts that we are paying. I know they're continuing and they're not changing, but I think they're important for the public to see. Because it's one thing to talk about them, it's another thing to begin to see the numbers that we have to look at and that we have to consider. And then the other part of that is, where do they appear in the 80 million? Because you said one was new enhancements and one was step pay, and the specialty pay, if it's continued, doesn't fall under the new pay enhancements. Where is that money accounted for?
I can't answer that question. There's your man right there. He did the chart.
Those are not included in the $80 million. The $80 million is incremental costs, additional costs associated with this contract, as opposed to the existing contract. So since there's no change in longevity pay, the longevity provisions aren't going to cost us any more in the new contract as opposed to what they're currently costing us. The reason we put step on there, even though there's no changes in the steps that are being proposed, the frequency of the step system does cost us more. Just the existing step system, the way it works, will cost us more over the next 5 years than what the current contract calls for. But again, like longevity pay, field training officer pays, those are not increasing, and the incremental cost of having those same provisions to the same number of officers is essentially zero. There is no incremental cost. And on that part, I think we could put up some slides here in a bit that would show you what the different specialty pays are, and we're working on getting the data together, the slide that would show you the step system.
Okay, the step system is in budget question number 53 if you're looking for it.
Great.
Set out, I believe, in terms of the percentages. So I just want to be clear. So the total number that we're on the hook for, because these things are still in the contract, they just didn't change, is above
Sure.
80 million.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you look at all of our roughly 2,000 sworn personnel and the total cost of their sworn personnel, their existing wages, it's far more than $80 million over 5 years. $80 million is incremental, the additional costs due to the provisions of this contract.
But is the step pay that we're increasing also just the amount that's increased because of the changes in the contract, or are we also having step pay that's increasing because their contract, because
The step pay is increased. The cost of the step system is increasing just because of the nature as you progress through the steps, people get paid more.
I understand that, but
provisions
is the
aren't changing.
incremental part, the cost of the existing step pay includes the rest of their base pay that's not changing with this contract? So if I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding the numbers that you have presented us with. So if I get $100 and I went up to $105, are you just taking the increase from the contract on that $5 increment for my step pay, or is it on the $105?
It's an incremental increase.
So I'm paying more than the $22.5 million in terms of covering the cost of the steps?
Yes. Yeah, the steps, because of the cost of the step system, which gets embedded in their base cost. So, I mean, from a...
I understand that. I'm just, we're trying to understand how much more we are paying our officers over this time period of the 5 years. They would be getting additional step beyond this $22.5 million because it's coming off of their existing base?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I may need to ask you some more questions later when I absorb that. Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Kitchen.
Oh, I just wanted to reiterate, I think it would be, and I think Councilmember Alter may have already asked about this, but I think it would be very helpful for people to see the step pay and to see the percentage and the dollar amounts, because what was presented to us was simply the increase in the base pay, but that doesn't account for the entire raise that officers receive over time. So to say that a raise is 1% is not accurate, because it doesn't include the percentage of the step pay. So I would ask that we get that chart that Councilmember Alter had discussed, and that be presented also.
Manager?
We'll work on getting that chart up, but the actual step pay program, the pay increases are attached in the very back of the proposed contract that has been posted for 2 weeks. So it's been out there, but we'll get the information pulled up for the program.
I'm just thinking to be user-friendly for the community that is seeing what is presented right now. I think it's very helpful if we present that also.
We'll get it.
And let me add to that. Chris just gave me this. The current step levels are, after year one, officers get a 12% increment. Those are people that come onto the department and that we've trained them to be police officers. They've started at a cadet level. They go up 12% after their first year of service. Year two, they go up 10%. Then they don't go up in 3 or 4 or 5. Then in 6, they go up 7%. Then they don't go up in 7 or 8 or 9. And then in 10, they go up 7%. And they don't go up in 11, 12, or 13. And then in 14, they go up 7%. And they don't go up until they get to 16, where they go up to 7, and that's the last step. And so the $22.5 million that you have there, if you have an officer, for instance, that's in their 3rd year right now, they've already got the 10% step. That cost is not in here because that's your current cost for that officer. But the 6-year step would be in there. And since they wouldn't reach the 10, that next 7 would not be in there, and that's the 22.5 million. Did I get that right, Chris?
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that. So their base wages that they get paid now, if I just got my step, that would be considered part of my base. But if during this 5-year period I stay long enough to get another step, that increase
That's correct.
is in there. But what I was getting already in my base from past years is not.
Well, the step pay table has the increment that you have. And so when we do a contract like this, they will come back and do a pay table that shows what the pay is for every step.
Mm-hmm.
And it will reflect the new wage increments for each of those fiscal years. And so fiscal year 1 will have a wage table. The next year that has the steps all in it will have a new wage table, and it'll have the dollars for every one of them. And in the 4th year of the contract, for the people that got a step at 7%, and they got the first year 1% and the first year 2%, that dollar figure there will be 9% higher.
Okay. Do you have, it looked like you might have had the steps to put on the screen, is that? Just not everyone thinks out loud with numbers, and so it's helpful for
Right.
them to see.
Slide 12, please. Yep. So this looks at the different specialty pays and the fact that they're not changing, but that doesn't mean there's no cost associated with them. They're just not changing. Slide 12. I don't know if this is all of them, but these are certainly the big ones. So longevity pay is $107 per year of service up to 25 years. That currently costs us $2.4 million, and we're not proposing any change to it. So it's not costing us any more per year. $2.4 million per year is what the longevity provisions of the contract costs us. And again, there's no change there. Shift differential is $300 per month. That's $2.9 million annual cost associated with that specialty pay. The field training officer pay, or FTO pay, is $175 per month. There's not a lot of people doing field training officer programs, so that's only $300,000. Bilingual pay, $175 per month at an annual cost of $670,000. The educational and certificate pay is complicated. It depends if you have how many hours of college credit you have, if you have a bachelor's, if you have a master's, if your certificate's intermediate, advanced, or a master. You can't get both, and so it's kind of complicated, but it's a relatively expensive one at $3.5 million to pay the specialty pays to all of our officers for all the different educational stipends that they have. So that gives you a sense of the specialty pays that are in the current contract that are not changing, but what the annual cost of those provisions is.
So that's about another $11 million.
Sounds right? Yeah.
Thank you.
What,
If you look at the current for roughly 2,000 officers, the current personnel costs, base wages, steps, all the specialty pays, it's about $260 million is what the total personnel cost with over 2,000 officers is.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Vanino, what about there's additional pay for mental health certification, is there not? Is that in the education and certification?
I have to check on that. This is a slide we put together in anticipation of these questions, and so let's get the mental. I can check on that. We'll check and get an answer to that real
Thank
quick.
you.
Unless Chief, if you know right off the bat. Okay, we'll figure that out.
Further questions at this point from staff? Chief?
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, Manager. Brian Manley, Chief of Police. Appreciate having a little bit of time to go over my thoughts on the contract. I think you all are aware that I am in support of the contract. I believe that, as in any negotiation, neither party may have walked away with everything that they wanted from the beginning, but I think both parties walked away leaving a proposal in front of you that addresses the concerns that were brought about at the initiation of the contract discussions. I think this contract does a lot in the area of accountability and transparency for the department. And as your chief, that's important to me, that we can be responsible to this community. We can give them the information that oftentimes they want, that under current law Government Code 143, we cannot give them unless we make exceptions to that. And I think what the membership agreed to with this contract allows our department to be more transparent and more accountable. I don't plan to go through everything that Mr. Denton just went through because I think you just got a comprehensive presentation on that. There are a few points that I will reiterate briefly, but expound upon on why I think that this is an important contract issue. First of all, the most important part of any disciplined system is access. In this community, we've heard over the years challenges with people that didn't feel comfortable coming forward to make a complaint against the police department. I think that's why we have satellite locations where citizens can go to make a complaint. You don't have to come to the police department. You can go to the Office of Police Monitor. You can make the complaint on the street. But as Mr. Denton just said, the system requires now that you identify yourself and then ultimately you sign your complaint with the penalty of perjury there. I think by removing all of that and allowing for anonymous complaints, we are telling this community, we want to know when you think we've done wrong. We want to know when you think we've not lived up to our standards and our policies, and we're willing to take down all of the barriers that we see and let you do so anonymously. As the police chief, that's important to me because the best thing we can do is fix problematic behavior as early as possible before it becomes a bigger issue maybe for an individual officer or a larger issue for the entire department. So I think that was significant and a great improvement to what we have right now in our complaint system requiring the identification of the complainant. In the area of transparency, oftentimes we hear that complainants don't know what happened with their complaint. And Government Code 143 again prohibits us from releasing information on those incidents that did not result in formal discipline, which would be a suspension of a day or more. By allowing the police monitor to have closeout conferences with the complainants, even if those allegations weren't sustained, and giving them information on the complaint, on their investigation, on what they uncovered, again, I think it's a step in the right direction, allowing us as a department to be more transparent with this community on what we're doing with these complaints as they come forward. There's been a lot of talk also about subpoena power and the authority of the Citizen Review Panel to weigh in on investigations. I know the Citizen Review Panel actually put a letter out. They are in support of this contract as well with the improvements to the oversight that are included in here. We have a system in place right now that I believe the system is adequate. And if there are failures in the system, it's because people have failed. We have a system where the police monitor sits in on every investigation they have access to. The subject officer, the witness officers, they have the ability to suggest questions to our investigators. So if we have investigations where we believe the investigations weren't thorough, then I think either the police monitor's office failed because they had the opportunity to suggest additional lines of questioning, or I have failed because my investigators aren't asking the right questions. And I stand here before you not aware of a case where we have had significant issues that we were not thorough in the investigation. And again, the investigations are having the oversight of the police monitor. And then ultimately, the improvements in this contract, when we're talking about critical incidences, will allow for the Citizen Review Panel to have a member watch the interview of that subject officer and see the reaction, read the body language, again, which will provide more oversight. So when I look at the system, I really think that the system that we have set up today works. And if we have a failure, it's because somebody hasn't done their job or held up their responsibility in ensuring that we're asking the right questions and then that we're holding people accountable. When I look at the concerns over the suspensions of 3 days or less being reduced after a period of either 2 years or 3 years based upon the significance of that conduct, again, I stand before you and tell you that's where you hold me accountable, because I shouldn't be issuing discipline of 3 days or less if I believe that conduct should not fall off of an officer's official record after 2 to 3 years. Keeping in mind it's always there, it's always in the history. It just doesn't show up when we pull their history for disclosure. And so that's, again, I think the systems work. It's that the people have to do the right thing, and then when they don't, there has to be accountability. And I stand before you ready to take that accountability if we come up short on some of these. I've looked at the issue of the 3-day or less suspensions, and again, they're not suspensions for conduct that really goes against the integrity of the organization or the ethos of policing. A lot of them are officers making mistakes, either negligent crashes, violations of pursuit policy. We're only supposed to have 2 officers in a pursuit without supervisor permission. Sometimes that third officer just gets ahead of themselves and gets engaged. So those are the type of incidents that we see that are generating these complaints of with suspensions of 3 days or less. And again, that's my responsibility if it's something that shouldn't fall off of their record. Even if it does, under Government Code 143 and under the contract, I have the authority to bypass individuals for promotion. And so if there is an individual that is up for a promotion and that based on previous conduct, past history, concerns, I can bypass that individual. I will end up in an arbitration hearing in front of a third-party arbitrator, but that's the way the system works. And so I do retain that authority. We also, if we are suspending officers for significant issues, and that officer, either he or she is on a current promotional list, we have the ability and frequently make part of that agreed upon suspension that they voluntarily remove themselves from that promotional list, therefore negating their opportunity to promote, requiring them to test again, knowing that that discipline will be held against them for a period of time that we spell out. So there's a lot built into the system right now to where we can handle the concerns with officers' conduct that has come up in these discussions. I also am very much in favor of the way this was structured for the stipends for keeping patrol officers, corporals, and sergeants on the street by incentivizing them to stay beyond those 4 years. Patrol is really the backbone of the department. That's where you make or break your agency. That's where the relationships are built. I can go to all the meetings I go to, but it's going to be that officer, that young man, that young woman that shows up at the doorstep, shows up at the call. That's where it takes place. And the more seniority we can keep on the streets, the more seniority within our supervisor ranks to oversee those officers, that's very beneficial. And that's why I'm very much in favor of the way we structured the stipends to keep seniority on the street, because it is so important that we maintain that out there. I will just touch on a few of the concerns that I have if we were to go without the agreement. First of all, in the area of hiring and promotions, our department has done a lot to work towards being a diverse department to reflect the community that we serve, both in total numbers and then both in rank within the department. If we go back to straight Government Code 143 and I lose the ability to add different qualifications and requirements to the promotional process, I am concerned that that will be negatively impacted. We would lose the ability to hire in the way that we do now, and instead it would be everybody showing up on one day, taking the same written test, and the order you fall on that list is the order that we hire you. That's how we did it 28 years ago when I was hired, and I think we've evolved since then, and we're better for it. More importantly is in the area of promotions. I currently have the authority, and we do this, and that is assessment centers for the rank of sergeant, lieutenant, and commander. And these are very important ranks within the department in overseeing our operations and really ensuring that we're working towards our goals and our values. If we go back to Government Code 143 and we can no longer do assessment centers, our promotions will be based solely off of a written test. And again, there's a lot of research out there on written tests and how different groups perform on written tests. But more importantly, on a written test, you're gonna identify people that have the ability to study and then to regurgitate that information on a test. The assessment center lets us test things like communication skills, interpersonal skills, conflict resolution, the ability to multitask in an ever-changing environment in the moment. All of these things that we really want our supervisors to be able to do out on the street when they're making decisions, when seconds count and lives are on the line. So again, I think that if we were to lose the ability to include these assessment centers in our promotional assessments, that would be a step backwards in ensuring that we have the best men and women serving in our supervisory capacities that really are leading the younger officers as they enter the department. The other, I guess, losing the ability to hire a modified cadet class, that brings diversity in a different way. By being able to bring in men and women that have honorably served in other police departments across this country that meet our minimum standards of size of city and all, they bring a different type of diversity. They have policed in a different city and maybe by different techniques. And I think anytime we challenge ourselves and we learn from these officers, we have an opportunity to better ourselves. We also have the opportunity to get these men and women on the street in half the time at half the training cost that we do on other officers. And that is a significant concern. And then in the area of, again, being accountable to this community and transparent with this community, we would lose the citizen review panel. And that is the one true independent oversight mechanism that we have. People may think that it isn't all that it should be, but without it, we don't have anything. And we are, in fact, the only city that has something like that. So it is something to be proud of. And it would be a huge loss to lose that ability here in Austin. And especially given that what's proposed is to actually increase their authority, to allow the Citizens Review Panel to conduct their own questioning of the complainant in a case or a fact witness, to bring them before their public session and to ask them questions. The other piece, I think, where we have really increased is the ability to make public the letters from the Citizens Review Panel to the chief, and then my response back to the Citizens Review Panel. So the proposed contract in front of you expands those categories on which they can write letters. One of those categories actually talks about anything related to policy and procedure. So it really is making a recommendation on pretty much anything in the department. And when they send that recommendation to me, it will be public, and my response will be public. So that brings accountability all the way back up again where it should be, to the chief's office. And this community will be much more aware of the recommendations that their Citizens Review Panel is making, and then much more aware of my response. And again, that gives the manager the ability to hold me accountable if I'm not holding up the standards and the expectations of this community. So I think that that's a huge part of this contract, and one that we should not give less attention than deserved. So I've highlighted the main reasons that I really am in support of this, and I understand that it didn't accomplish everything that everybody wanted, but I don't think as a community we want to go back to operating under Government Code 143, which is how we did it 17 years ago, because we've benefited over the years. And I don't just mean the officers and their benefits. As a community, we've benefited through all of the additional oversight and accountability mechanisms that have been negotiated over these contracts. So I thank you for hearing me out. And if there are any questions at this time, I'll make myself available.
Colleagues, questions at this point? Councilman Garza?
Chief, you mentioned your concerns about going without a contract and how that affects diversity in hiring and promotion. Do you have data that shows how, cadet classes under the pure 143 versus cadet classes under a more flexible hiring, and the same, or data for promotion list, a 1-year 100-question test promotion versus a more flexible 24-month?
So Mayor Pro Tem's office, actually, we were having discussions earlier today on that very issue. We're trying to pull back records from 17 and 18 years ago. We didn't have the banner system back then, so the records that existed back then do not exist in the way they do today. I do have some rudimentary numbers that we're looking at right now. They are not, however, broken. The data that we have from back in 2001, I believe it is not broken down by rank. It's just broken down by the number of males and females in each of the ethnic categories that we track.
Did you say that you can give more information later?
Yes, and actually, I walked down here straight from the Mayor Pro Tem's office, and I was handwriting it down. So I don't know if your staff has it in a better format than my handwriting, but if so, that's what we have right now.
Okay. So when that information is available, you'll make that information available to us?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions here? Councilmember Garza?
Chief, sorry. The seniority on the streets issue, is that something that, why can't that be handled just by you? Why can't you just decide that, is that within your power to be able to say that there's going to be a certain number of officers with seniority on the streets without this contract?
You get into a position of not allowing officers opportunity because it would be a real negative incentive to tell somebody you can't leave the street because you have experience, but we're going to let this officer that has less experience than you leave the street. I think we're setting ourselves up to really have some issues in the department if we were to do that. What we do have the obviously the authority, and we actually do is if our vacancies get to the point to where we don't have enough officers on the street, we freeze anybody from leaving patrol. But I would not necessarily be in favor of telling a more senior officer that they could not leave for a desired either assignment outside of the patrol bureau, whether it be K-9 or narcotics or SWAT or one of our specialty units, because they have too much time. Then to me that incentivizes officers to leave as early as they can patrol because they may be held back later.
Anything else? Ms. Houston?
Thank you, Chief. You mentioned SWAT and K-9. Do they get extra pay or incentives for being in SWAT or K-9?
There are no specialty pays for that. The only specialty pay K-9 would get is many of them work evening hours, and so they would get the same specialty pay that anybody else would get for working the evening hours. There's no specialty pay, though, for being a tactical officer or part of the K-9 team.
Thank you.
Jimmy, Mr. Flanagan?
Thank you for being here, Chief. Can you help me understand the operational challenges you're facing in the department that are beyond a lack of number of officers? So I understand there are challenges, and we've heard plenty about how adding more officers to the force will help solve some problems. Are there other operational challenges in the department that merely adding more officers won't solve?
Well, and I'm not sure this is going to be in the exact direction you want me to go, council member, so straighten me out in a minute if I need to. But one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, but Mr. Denton did, I was before you several months ago, and I laid out for you my vision for the department and the direction we were going to take this department, fully implementing the matrix report, as I know you all would like us to do, and we're working towards doing that, the full implementation. It is very important, the involvement of my senior ranks in implementing the matrix report, and that would be the lieutenants, the commanders, and the chiefs. If this contract were not to pass, the lieutenants and the commanders are no longer exempt and therefore would be subject to getting overtime for any hours beyond 40. And being on the higher end of the pay scale for the department, that would have a significant budget impact. But I would not recommend that we have a department where your senior leaders, the ones that you want not only handling accountability during the daytime by reviewing your pursuits and your use of forces and your operational plans, not be available to go to meetings in the evening or on the weekend events and all that to continue to build that community trust like I talk to you all about so frequently. And without this agreement, we would be put in a position where I would have the entire lieutenant and command staff no longer being exempted from overtime and would either have to incur significant overtime costs to continue operating like we do and like we need to build the relationships, or be left without that opportunity.
So I know that I'm known for straightening things out, but that was a joke. Nobody laughed. Y'all too serious, man. I wasn't so much talking about command staff. I was really talking about hiring challenges, retention challenges. Are there other things that compensation changes in terms of an operational challenge for the department?
And if you're asking about why do I think the compensation increases in the contract are necessary to keep doing what we're doing, am I understanding your question appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to belabor it, but
okay.
But as the manager of the department, are there operational challenges, the ability for this department to do its job that you feel are being solved through this compensation package?
Yes, I think that we are able to recruit the best and the brightest into the Austin Police Department because we have a pretty strong reputation around the country for being a rather progressive police department, and the pay package is one that is incentivizing officers to come here. Now, the officers will also, if they're considering coming to Austin or to other major departments or either the regional departments, they will look at what department they're coming to. So the more we go against the Government Code 143, again, it's set by law, the protections, the provisions, the authorities that officers have, the officers would look at that. So if they're going to go to a department where you say you have anonymous complaints, they'll know that they might be subjected to more complaints in that department versus another, and so they would consider that in their decisions of wanting to go to that department potentially than another, and I think that that's why the compensation issue, it's important. It should reflect the high expectations of this community that they place on this department, rightfully so, and it should also respect our openness to pulling away from some of those provisions in Government Code 143.
Okay, Councilmember Alder.
Chief, am I correct in saying that the contract does not preclude us from implementing recruitment supports, including monetary things, in order to work on our diversity issue outside the contract?
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear it doesn't prohibit us from doing
Recruitment supports outside of the contract. So we could provide tutoring for the test. We could potentially provide a stipend if we met some kind of diversity criteria in our hiring.
I'm not aware of any restrictions under Government Code 143 that would preclude us from offering incentives or tutoring opportunities to specific groups, but I would want law to weigh in on that. I'm not aware of any restrictions myself.
Okay, so there are things we can do outside of the contract process if diversity of our workforce is one of the goals.
Based on how you posed the question and my understanding of Government Code 143, I do believe the items that you talked about would be allowable.
Thank you.
Ms. Houston.
One more question, Chief Manley. You talked about retention. Can you give me some data, or is there data that shows how many officers we're losing because we're not either paying them enough or for whatever reasons? What is the problem with retention?
I don't know that I've alluded to a problem with retention because we don't necessarily have a problem with retention here. And I think that what we have been talking about, though, is if this contract is not ratified, that I actually, at this point in time, have 149 officers that have 23 years of experience or more, which means they're eligible to retire because our retirement system allows an officer at 23 years, any age, to retire. So we have 149 officers that are currently at 23 years or beyond. And given the change that this, with that going without a contract, with the sick payout on the end of the career dropping from 1,700 hours down to 900 hours, I think that there are officers that are going to leave earlier than they would have so that they don't lose that additional 800 hours for managing their sick time throughout their career. So that's the numbers that we've been talking about, and that's the 149 that are eligible today that have 23 years or more. And if all of them were to leave, which, again, I would not expect to happen, on me being one of them, it would be a $16.2 million expense on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
Just to get back to the question of recruitment supports and some of the provisions that you have within Meet and Confer for hiring, can you just touch again on the hiring provisions that you have the ability to do now, and whether you could achieve those same aims through the kind of recruitment supports you were addressing a minute ago, such as tutoring?
I think I've got it, Mayor Pro Tem.
I mean, you're still basically back to a test, which we know has disparate impact.
Yes, and what would happen is you'd be matched to that test all the way through the process. The way it works now is we have a rolling application process. And so you you're entered into the process at whatever point you submit your application, and then that's the point you would proceed through. So that would have, in my opinion, a less detrimental impact on diversity than everybody sitting on the same day and taking a test, and your number is based on how you performed on that test. We will still do the same psychological evaluation, the same medical evaluation, but what we would gain under the current system, what we have as a gain is that it's kind of a rolling admission into the process instead of it all being based on how you performed on one test, which, again, as you identified, I know there was conversation the other day amongst council as well about the impact of standardized tests.
And then could you just address it briefly with regard to promotion?
So with promotions, the big challenge there is if we were without a contract and if we were without the provisions that the department has allowed us to deviate from Government Code 143, promotions would be based solely upon your score on a written test. Currently, the way we do that is we do a percentage. You will take a written test, and your written test is between 45 and 50% of your final placement on an eligibility list, and I can get you those exact percentages if you'd like. The remaining percentage is the assessment center that we do. And this is where we bring in outside assessors from police departments across the country that are either at the rank that candidate is testing for or above, and we run them through a series of exercises that test their ability to communicate, their interpersonal skills, their ability to operate in a dynamic, changing environment. We'll throw tactical scenarios at them and walk them through what their decision points were and how they would handle that. So we would lose the ability to really ensure that we're promoting the most well-rounded candidates in lieu of promoting those who scored the best on a test.
Okay. Anything else at this point? Ms. Vanino, you don't need to come up. I just want to say that you handed out a memorandum or sent to the council a memorandum that deals with the impacts on the budget and on the forecast going out 5 years. I have questions about that. So at the break in this, I want to touch base with you to understand that. If other people want to have Mr. Vanino come up and do that here, he certainly can. Yeah, not now, but to bring him up later. If there was other interest, then I would have him do it here. Otherwise, I would just grab him and have him help explain what that was. So I just point that out. If any of the council members are ready to go to public testimony, we could do it. Mr. Vanino?
So not on the issue you just asked about, but in regards to mental health, the stipend is $175. That's about $175 a month. It's about $300,000 a year expense for the mental health stipend, which wasn't on our list we put up earlier.
So how many officers do we have?
150 officers get that stipend.
Out of how many?
Roughly 2,000 sworn personnel. The chief might have a more exact number. It's about
Okay,
2,000.
so we only have 100 and what?
154, I believe, people that get the mental health stipend.
Out of about 2,000. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. All right, so we go now to public content. Before we do, this is obviously a real significant question coming before the council. And there are a lot of people on this on both sides that feel very fervently as to the view or the position or the priority that you're here to hear about or to advocate. In the weeks leading up to this, I've had the opportunity to have spent time with folks on multiple sides of this issue. And I've been really impressed with the constructive nature of everyone that has come into my office and that I've had the chance to visit with. And I appreciate the fact that many of those people have engaged with other people whose views are different than theirs are to talk through the issues that we have here. I say that because as we get the public testimony, there will be speakers that speak differently than the positions that people might have. But I firmly believe that most everybody who's coming up to speak here is driven by what is best for the community and for the people that live here. even if our conclusions are different. And I just want to ask and say that it is the expectation of the dais that we'll conduct this conversation in that kind of constructive way, which means that we'll just be constructive as people talk, and we'll listen to what people are saying and recognize that this is a tough question, but most everybody comes here with constructive motivations. All right, I'm going to, I have 5 people speaking for, speaking against. That will begin with 3 minutes. And then we'll get to the people 1 minute until we break for dinner, which would probably be, near about 6 o'clock-ish for us to take that break. We're going to begin with Thomas Villarreal and Sam Singawe is on deck. Be speaking at the other podium. Sir.
Thank you, Mayor Adler and Council, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Thomas Villarreal, and I'm appointed Vice President of the Austin Police Association. I've been a police officer for 11 and a half years, and I was on APA's Meet and Confer team during this year's negotiations. Over the past 10 months, the Austin Police Association and the City of Austin have negotiated a tentative agreement that addresses the community's desire to strengthen transparency and improve civilian oversight. This contract also includes fair raises for officers while adjusting the trend in the cost of police salary spending. Through this contract, we can accomplish these items while also maintaining the ability to be the employer of first choice for potential officers across the nation. Our officers voted to ratify this contract with an 85% approval. This contract is unlike any other contract this council votes on. It's not just another labor contract. It's a contract between the Austin Police Department and every member of this community. This contract was negotiated in good faith, was not rushed, and included input from the community and stakeholders. I believe that we are the finest police department in the nation, and I believe this contract furthers that notion. One point that merits great discussion is the fiscal impact of this contract. With this contract, we reduce the footprint of police salaries that police salaries occupy on the general fund and leave over $100 million over 5 years for council to spend as they see fit. You pull up the first slide, please. In using numbers from the city budget office, we were able to identify a way to secure modest raises for our officers while simultaneously reducing the footprint of police salaries on the general fund. Understanding the need to see what this trend would look like over the next 5 years, we attempted to get these projected police salary costs from the budget office. When we were unable to get these numbers from the city, we looked at historical data to identify trends that would allow us to appropriately forecast what police salary costs would be for the next 5 years. That's what this slide is. Second slide, please. After forecasting the total police salary cost, we used general revenue numbers from the budget office's 5-year financial forecast. And I will add that I got new numbers today, and so this is the most up-to-date information that I've ever been given. To identify a downward trend in the percentage of general fund revenue that is spent on police salaries. This trend moves from 24.47% of the general fund spent on police salaries in FY17 to 25.14% in FY22, a reduction of over 2%. While this may not seem like a lot, in fiscal year 22, the forecasted general fund is over $1,223 million. The difference between the amount that we would spend if we spent the same percentage of the general fund that council spent last year and the amount that we have forecasted to spend in fiscal year 22 is over $28 million. As you can see in the slide in front of you, that over the 5-year life of the contract, there's a total reduction of police salary spending of over $100 million. There is money saved in each and every year that council may use for health and human services, to hire more officers, or to spend however they see fit. On this slide, we have shown how many officers this reduction could afford to hire each year and as a total. We have only done this for demonstration purposes.
Hold on 1 second. So I see that you have 2 people that have donated time. They would be at 1 minute each. Let me see if they're here. Is Connor Hillard here?
Yes, sir.
Is Talia Hill here? Talia Hill? Then, sir, you have 1 more minute.
Yes, sir. We're not here to ask council to hire this many officers over 5 years. We simply want to show that if council wished to spend tomorrow what they spent yesterday regarding a percentage of the general fund on police salaries, there's plenty of money to grow the department. We were also tasked with bringing down the percentage that our salaries are at the top end of our patrolman salaries above our competitors. We were able to bring this down from 13.6% to 10.7%, like Mr. Denton expressed earlier. The last thing that I would like to talk about are the long-term financial implications of this contract. In the fiscal year 2018 budget, all city employees were given a 2.5% raise. This cost the city $445 million in a one-year cost. The 5-year cumulative cost of those raises is over $22 million. The FY18 financial impact of our contract is just over $3 million in the first year. When you calculate the 5-year cumulative cost, it's just over $11.6 million. I find it troubling that this low level of increased compensation for officers is being touted as fiscally irresponsible when it was given in exchange for increased transparency and the expansion of civilian oversight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you please, sir, can you get copies of that?
I had copies for you guys, and we actually just got new budget forecast numbers, those same numbers that Ed gave to you guys, and so I have just updated my spreadsheet so I give you guys the most up-to-date information.
And is that something you can have that you can hand out to
I
us?
have it on a thumb drive. I just did it on my laptop right now.
Okay, if you give it to someone on my staff, they'll go make copies of it here for the dais.
Yes, sir.
And my next question was, have you seen the numbers that came out from Mr. Vaninu?
Yes, sir. So
and are your numbers consistent with that? You use those numbers?
That's the numbers I use, yes, sir.
Okay. If you'd hand out, that'd be appreciated. Stay there for a second. Councilmember
I don't have a question. I want to say thank you for providing this information. But I would say, Mr. Mayor, that these numbers are dramatically different from what was provided to us by our budget officer. So I'd invite you to talk with our budget officer. It does not, the numbers from our budget officer does not allow for this kind of hiring and this kind of excess. I really appreciate the work that you did, and I don't mean to discount that.
No,
I just want the public to understand, and everyone else on the dais, that these numbers are not even close to what our budget officer has provided.
I think, Ms. Kitchen, if you're referring to the amount of officers that we can hire, I do think that there's a fundamental difference in how the budget office views my spreadsheet and how the Police Association views our spreadsheet.
Okay, so Mr.
Thank
Vanino,
you so much.
Mr. Vanino, when you come up to explain your spreadsheet and your memo, the question we'll have is help us understand what the differences are between the two. So to the degree that you don't know that or don't have the information to do that, if you could touch base with him so that you could answer that question, we'd appreciate that. Okay, thank you. Now, before you begin, the speaker who will be moving up to the other podium is Chandra Ewing. Please.
Thank you. So good evening. My name is Samuel Sinyangwe, co-founder of Campaign Zero, a national organization focused on police accountability. We have launched the first comprehensive review of police union contracts around the country in the 100 largest cities. Of the 81 cities where we got their police union contracts, Austin was in the group of 6 cities that had the least accountable contract in the country. And let me go into why. Austin's police union contract, as you've discussed a little bit earlier, the 180-day rule, allowing officers to escape accountability because of a mere technicality about how long that investigation took place or when the police chief was notified of it. We've seen provisions in this contract that do a number of other things that are harmful for police accountability at a time when so many people are feeling unsafe because of police interactions that they've had or that they've witnessed. We see in this contract through the enabling of the citizens' oversight structure that it limits the structure to not having subpoena power, not having the power to discipline officers. These are powers that civilian review boards across the country have, whether it's in San Francisco or in Oakland. Atlanta has the power to subpoena officers. We have Miami-Dade has the power to subpoena officers. So many civilian review boards and structures have this power, and yet in this contract, it actually prohibits the Citizens Oversight Board from having that power. We see in this contract the erasure and reduction of evidence of misconduct, whether it is evidence of suspensions, 1, 2, or 3 days, reducing the written reprimand, and preventing the public from having access to them. Altogether, we looked at 6 different categories and ways in which police union contracts can be harmful to and undermine police accountability, and Austin had all 6 of those issues. So I'm here today to talk about what an alternative could be, where instead of spending $80 million over 5 years on a police union contract to increase benefits and pay to a police department that is already the highest paid of any other department in the state, you have an opportunity to be a leader in this space of standing up for police accountability and transparency and demanding something better, demanding that Austin lead, not only in terms of accountability, not only in terms of civilian oversight, but also leading in terms of understanding what the priorities are and how best to achieve them. If the priority is safety, the research literature is quite clear that the best approach to achieving that is not investing more in police. A study from Patrick Sharkey just came out that showed that every 10 additional nonprofit organizations, community organizations working on community safety, were correlated with a 9% reduction in the murder rate and a 6% reduction in the violent crime rate. With that $80 million, you could invest $800,000 in 20 organizations over that 5-year window. That would have a substantially higher impact on public safety than investing that money in a police union contract that is still unaccountable.
Alderwoman, you have donated time for
Thank
Matt
you.
Wallace. Is Matt Wallace here? Okay, you have an additional minute.
Thank you. Wonderful.
What are your names? Amanda Mills. Okay. Just her? All right, you have 2 more minutes.
Great. So as I was saying, this is an opportunity to lead. Number 1, to lead in terms of achieving public safety in an evidence-based fashion that invests in community approaches, that invests in mental health response and substance abuse prevention, that invests in crisis intervention, and that does not invest in continue to expand an approach that frankly is not as driven by data and actually what works. Second, when we talk about civilian oversight, we looked at many of the changes that were proposed here that we just heard, and so many of them are just small compared to what we've seen so many other cities do. When you look at the data on community oversight, we talk about the need to have this Citizens Oversight Board, but that board is so ineffective and powerless that it really does not add value to the current situation. When you look at the data, 170 complaints of police misconduct were levied in 2015, the most recent year available. And we found that only 7% of those complaints were sustained. And of those, only 3 complaints resulted in a suspension of the officer. Out of the 170 complaints, less than 2%. Now, obviously, 170 is probably a severe undercount because of how difficult it is to actually file a complaint. So what we see is a structure that has been created that actually does not achieve the goal of independently investigating, does not have the power to subpoena, does not have the power to actually ensure a transparent and accountable process that is civilian-driven to ensure accountability. And so you really have a few options here. One, it could be to really push back on this current negotiated contract and demand a contract that is a leader in the space, a contract that is accountable, the most accountable contract in the country that not only removes the problematic provisions but ensures a civilian oversight process that can lead this country in terms of power, in terms of the power that invests in community to get to the truth about what happened and ensure that accountability happens as a result of police misconduct. You have the option of leading in terms of how you shift investment away from ineffective approaches and into community-based responses.
For another time, somebody else want to donate a minute to him? What's your name?
Wonderful.
I'm sorry? Okay. Could you come down to the clerk to make sure she has your name? Go ahead. 1 more minute.
Sure. And finally, you have the power to join an emerging movement of cities across this country that for the first time is standing up and saying that we're going to hold the line and we're going to demand an accountable police department with the hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars that you are spending on this department. Citizens deserve nothing less. You can actually join a movement that started with San Antonio, where for the first time you had a non-unanimous vote on a police union contract reauthorization. You have cities like Portland, where they actually successfully removed provisions in the contract that established that 48-hour rule, that delay in actually getting to the truth of what's happening in an incident of misconduct. They removed that because they were serious about accountability. You're seeing in cities like Chicago now, where the city council, the board of aldermen, has said that they will not vote to approve a contract unless all of the types of provisions that are problematic are removed. And here you have Austin, where you can actually go much further and be a leader in this country for police accountability, for standing up for the most marginalized and impacted citizens and demanding an investment in what works. Thank you.
The next speaker that we have over here. So we have like 160 people to speak. We're probably going to be going really late.
It was particular.
And I recognize, so I would ask that we, as best we can, we just go from one speaker to the next speaker, or really it'll add 45 minutes, so thank you. The next speaker we have is Chandra Ewing at this, and the next person, if they would start working their way to the other one, is DeRay McKisson. And Chandra, do you have donated time from someone?
I don't think so, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, sir. Mayor and Madam Manager and all those on the council, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I spent nearly 15 years in the military, and I was on an indefinite enlistment. I was going to stay in the military. That was where I wanted to be. I was approached by a white male to join Austin Police Department, and I hadn't considered it or anything, but I decided to come down here to find out what it is that he thought I would be so good at. I walked into recruiting. I saw a white male, a black male, a black female, a Hispanic male, and I thought, wow, this is different than what I thought it would be. When I was in my academy class, we had white males, black females, across the board. We had a whole gamut of races in there, and I thought this is where this is pretty good. I was able to get out of the military, nearly 15 years, and I started a new career here. We need this contract because we want to keep the department with the face of the community that it serves. We want to keep the department transparent. We want to keep the department in the way that it's going. We talk about moving our department into the future. This contract will catapult it into the future. We need this. If we go back to civil service, we go back to pen and paper test. From my experience and seeing it sometimes working with recruiting, the military is made up of 70% white males. That is statistically correct. If we go back to civil service, the pool that we get will be pulled from the military. Because we pull a lot from the military already. So we will be pulling a lot. That's going to be the face of our future. It's already known how different races perform on written tests. It's statistically true. If we go back to pen and paper and we are continually pulling from the military, with 70% of males being in the military, making up the entire military, the face of Austin Police Department will look a certain way in 10 years. We don't want that. We don't want to go back. We don't want to go back to pen and paper, and we don't want to go back to 1979 or 1980. We want to keep moving in the future. We want to keep our officers safe. We want to keep you safe. We want to keep the citizens safe. And this contract is one that I truly, truly believe and feel that will get us to where we need to be for the future. I also feel that when you look at the 70%, the way we're moving, and then the civil service gets those persons coming from the military get 5 points already added to their final score when they're being recruited. That's another advantage that gives that pool of persons that are being recruited. So we need this contract to move us further into the future.
Thank you very much.
You.
The next speaker that we have is DeRay McKesson at this. And then coming back here will be Andrew Romero. Mr. McKesson, did you have time donated to you?
I don't know. I think I'll be good with 3 minutes.
3 minutes? All right.
Cool.
You're on.
So I'm DeRay McKesson. I'm a national activist and a co-founder of Campaign Zero, an organization that is centered on solutions around police violence and accountability. Like Sam already talked about, we did the first ever public analysis of police union contracts around the country. And I'll just talk about a few things. Is one, that we believe in safety. We believe that communities should be safe, that when people go out, they should know that they can come home. We also believe in accountability, that there will be standards and there should be consequences when people don't meet those standards. And we also believe in a justice system that is fair and equitable. The challenge with this contract and with this police department right now is that it doesn't actually have a justice system that is fair. So we think about what it means that there's a different set of rules that the police play by. So we think about three things specifically. One is the 180-day requirement. Is right now, the proposal would mean that that would be waived for criminal complaints or criminal proceedings. But when you think about things that aren't criminal, so if a police officer pulls their gun and points it at somebody, if they call them the N-word or another slur, like that wouldn't actually be changed out of this. So we know from the Me Too movement that just because a victim doesn't come forward immediately or in 180 days, that doesn't mean that there wasn't something wrong with that. The second is we think about this contract right now allows the police to have access to investigation material before they're interrogated. There's no other public body or proceeding where somebody gets access to all the investigation materials against them before they're ever interrogated. That's not a fair system. That's not something any private citizen would ever benefit from. And there's no understanding of how that actually allows the police to do their job any better. And the third is about citizen oversight. And like Sam already talked about, it's like, what does it mean to have a citizen oversight board that actually has no structural power, that can only at best make recommendations, that has no subpoena power or discipline power? And we know that there's civilian oversight boards across the country that do have those things. So we think about like teachers, for instance, is when we think about the importance of standards for teachers, this isn't about being against teachers. It's about saying that we think that kids should have great educations. This isn't about being anti-police. This is about making sure that there is standards and there are standards in community that hold people accountable. I've never been a doctor before, but I know what hospitals should look like. I know what doctors and what care should look like. I've never been a police officer, and I understand the role is hard. I also know that there shouldn't be a different set of rules that the police get to play by. And this contract sets you up, if you vote against it right now, to do something that is remarkable. I was a chief human capital in the Baltimore City school system. I managed our contracts in the human capital office, a department that is as big as the Austin public schools. And I say that because I know that the negotiating table, sometimes you have a chance to change history and change the course of a department, and you have that right now. You have a chance to do something that will put you on par and make you a leader in this space that has a structural power to make sure that the police are actually held accountable in real ways. And I think that if you don't vote for this contract, then you are sending a message that you believe that there should be real teeth, that there should be something in this contract that is meaty. And I think that that is a standard bearer. As Sam already talked about, there are cities across the country that have done this, and we would love for you to be one of the cities that joins that team. Thank you.
Thank you. After Andrew Romero talks, then coming back to the other side will be Walter Moreau.
Hello, my name is Andrew Romero. I'm a sergeant with the Austin Police Department. I'm also the vice president of the Police Association. I'd like to introduce a video. One of our other sergeants, Mike Crumrine, was unable to be here today, and so we shot a video of his testimony, and I'd like to play that for you right now.
Let me check. You have some time donated from Trey Salinas. Is he here? Okay. And is Sarah Marshall here? Okay. So you have 3 plus 1 plus 1. You have 5 minutes.
Dustin Clinkscales would like to donate a minute as well.
And Dustin
Clinkscales.
Clinkscale. Okay. Then you have 6 minutes. There's someone else raised their hand. Do you need 7 minutes?
We're good.
6 minutes. Okay. Go ahead.
Can you turn the volume?
Well, hang on a second. We don't have any sound.
Couple of days. I'm going to be marrying the love of my life and my.
Can you start this again?
Absolutely. Fiance Leander Davila, and after November 18th, he'll be my husband and I'll be his, and we will be. Mayor, council, I'm truly sorry I'm not going to be able to be here today while you discuss this and answer questions, but. Here in a couple of days, I'm going to be marrying the love of my life, my fiance, Leander Davila. And after November 18th, he'll be my husband and I'll be his, and we will be on our honeymoon. And to be able to sit up here and say that and be a part of that is truly unique, and it's unique to the successes of this community. but I wanted to express to you the reasons why I couldn't be here, and if it wasn't for that, I would love to have been there to answer any further questions that you might have. So my name is Michael Kermine, and I'm the president of the Lesbian Gay Peace Officers Association, Austin. We are the first and only Lesbian Gay Peace Officers Association in the state of Texas, and the reason that we were formed was because of the opportunity that this department allowed us to have. We realized back in 2009, given an incident that had happened in the department, that there was an opportunity for us to reach out and help educate other officers, educate others about what it means to be LGBT and what it means to be an LGBT officer working within the Austin Police Department. Our organization, which I happen to be one of the founding members of, has been able to come together and really make some very strong inroads in the community and building trust and respect between law enforcement and the community. When I came to APD 16 years ago, when I started my police career 30 years ago, I never thought I would be sitting in front of a camera, being able to be honest about who I am, and being able to actually tell my story of who I love, why I love, and be able to continue to do this profession as a law enforcement officer. I can tell you that this department doesn't just judge me based upon my orientation at all. I've had the opportunity to do phenomenal things in my career, and not just me, but other members of the department. And that's very unique for this city, and that's very unique for Austin. It has been said in these contract negotiations that one of the things that's been brought up is that our department isn't diverse enough, and our department doesn't pay attention enough to the community and what the community expects of us. And I'm here to speak about that because that's a falsehood. That's a myth that's not there. It's certainly something I have not seen in regards to this department's relationship with the LGBTQ community. We have done some incredible things here with the Austin Police Department, making inroads back into the community. Because we have a transgender officer and the issues that he went through with his health care, it was us, it was APD that went to council and got the council to go ahead and recognize that transgender inclusive health care benefits are not just for the police department, but for every part of their workforce. And they changed that to allow every part of the workforce to have those coverages. It was the Austin Police Department that put out an It Gets Better video talking about the rate of suicide in the LGBTQ community and the LGBT youth, and talking about bullying. We were the third department in the country to put something out, and frankly, if you ever have the opportunity to Google It Gets Better Austin Police and watch that video, I will challenge you, it's probably one of the best It Gets Better videos that's ever been produced, and it's been put out there. That video and us doing that, we got accolades from people all over the world. I had somebody from Europe, several people from Europe, email us and say, wow, y'all are from Texas, and this is what y'all are about. I want to go be a part of that. I want to be a part of that community. What we have done in our department has been phenomenal. And it's been not only due to the leadership of this department, but it's been due to the leadership of this association. This police association has been the first police association that has recognized our organization and gave us a spot on the board, gave us an executive board position on the Austin Police Association because they value this community and they value these officers. So if you want to say that we're not receptive and you want to say we're not part of that community, I challenge you with that. And I'll leave you with this. Last year in Pride, we had the opportunity to survey about 500 individuals who attended the Pride Festival. Granted, it wasn't a scientific survey, but it was a survey that we asked about 500 individuals of the interaction that they had between their community and the Austin Police Department. And the most staggering statistic that came out of that is 92 to 95% of the respondents said, if I was ever the victim of a crime, I would report to the Austin Police Department. For them to come forward and say, if I was the victim, I know that I would be trusted and respected, that is a huge benchmark to show the type of inroads that we've made into this community. Our police department is insanely diverse. Could we be better? Everybody could be better. But the fact that our organization, the first and only in the state of Texas, has close to 150 members of this department that are members of our organization is pretty telling on how many people that are willing in the rank and file to accept people who they are and championing them going ahead and being receptive back out to the community. We're constantly continuing to evolve. That's one of the reasons why we're going to be rolling out, after the first year, a victim-neutral affidavit and doing mandatory training for every member of the department in regards to issues between the LGBTQ community and the Austin Police Department. Very few other departments around the country could ever even speak to that, and we happen to be the people leading the forefront. So being diverse, we are. Mayor, council, I am truly...
Thank you. Mike is a great example. I've worked with Mike my whole career, and he's a great example. Is it okay if I finish my thought?
Yeah.
So I've worked with Mike my whole career, and he's a great example of the wonderful people that we have in this department. And we want to make sure that we get the Mikes of the future. And this contract is a huge part of that. Without the contract, it's going to be really, really difficult for us to be able to have these types of folks in our department.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Flanagan?
Mr. Romero,
Yeah.
are you aware of anything in the contract that prohibits that without the contract, the department wouldn't be LGBT supportive?
I think what I'm speaking to, because I've known Mike for so long, I know Mike can do anything he wants to do in this world. And, we're paid. I mean, part of this contract is about the compensation. And we're paid a wage that allows us to compete with the other opportunities that Mikes of our department have. Mike could do anything. And he chooses to be a police officer because he wants to serve, but he also has a family that he has to support. And our contract is the reason why he can make that sacrifice to our community. And so, yeah, it's Mike could do anything he wants to do in this world, and he chose to be a part of this department. And I want to make sure that all the Mikes that are out there don't pick some other department because the cost of living is less compared to the pay, that they don't pick another department because they're not in the middle of a huge contractual dispute between the city and the association. That's what's important about this contract.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to make it clear to my colleagues that there wasn't anything the contract was required to do in order for the department to support LGBT officers. I have all the respect in the world for Officer Crumrine and the work of the LGBTOA and the support that the chief has given to the department. This is a conversation about compensation, and it is not a conversation about LGBT support or not LGBT support. I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay. The next speaker that we have is Bino. Walter Moreau. And then at the next podium here will be Bino Cardenas.
Walter Moreau, the Director at Foundation Communities. My concern with the contract is really...
And you have time donated to you? Is
No,
Brad?
I don't need it.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Big concern is can we afford it? I think you all know this is the big budget decision that bakes in for 5 years the biggest expense that you've got. I think I speak for many other human social service agencies in Austin that work on job training, mental health services, victim services, substance abuse programs. We don't pitch ourselves as crime prevention programs, but we have that impact. Usually at budget time, we're here scrambling around looking for funds. I'm proud to say at this budget time, you were able to find $100,000 that helped us with health insurance enrollment. We've got 2 days left. We've enrolled 4,400 folks. We're trying to get 5,000 folks enrolled. You might not think that's crime prevention, but when those 5,000 folks have access to health services for chronic disease management, for mental health, for substance abuse, it reduces first responder demands on police and other responses. Whatever you end up negotiating, that cost gets baked in. It impacts health and human services, parks, libraries, environmental protection, property tax, everything else that y'all care about. That's my main message.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Councilmember Alter. Councilmember Alter.
Thank you for being here to represent One Voice. Can you tell me how many members One Voice has, please, and what the goal of One Voice is?
I think One Voice has over 100 members now, and our main goal is
100 organizational
100
members?
organizations, and our main goal is to advocate for health and human services and support each other.
Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
Mr. Moreau, I just wanted to clarify, are you speaking on behalf of One Voice here? Have they taken a position on the contract?
They did not take a position on the contract. They have taken a position in the past, I think at the last public hearing, to express the concern about the cost and to make sure that it's something that we can afford because it really impacts everything.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I appreciate you being here.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Councilmember Kitchen.
So, Mr. Moreau, you may, I believe that One Voice, or at least a significant number of the organizations, have taken positions in the past about the need for additional dollars in health and human services. I believe a number of years back there was a number of around $6 million or so. Am I right in saying that the organizations that you represent have expressed the need for additional dollars in health and human services?
Correct. One Voice and various agencies, for many, many years, the health and human service funding at the city was flat. It has not kept up with the growth of population, has not kept up with other peer cities. I think it's safe to say that none of the members have step increases in their pay scales. We don't have the other benefits that are here, and we're suffering with the cost of services and payroll to keep up in Austin. This is not just an $80 million 5-year. That's maybe the incremental cost. It's way bigger than that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. At the next podium over here will be Ketty Sully. Mr. Gardner.
Sure.
You have 3
Mayor,
minutes.
Manager,
Is that right?
City
Did you have
Council.
any time donated to you? You have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Bino Cadenas. I'm an Austin police officer, work patrol. I'll be highlighting building community trust and strengthening transparency. I'm a board member with the Austin Cops for Charities and also a member with the Amigos en Azul organization. The proposed contract gives the Office of the Police Monitor, the OPM, the ability to assess complaints, have full access to internal affairs investigations, files, and interviews, monitor and make recommendations on policy, procedures, and discipline, conduct community outreach programs, and publish annual reports. Disciplinary memos are published and maintained on the OPM website. Complaints against officers will now be allowed to be filed online and anonymously. An additional person from the OPM will now be able to attend disciplinary hearings, and a complainant will now have 30 days following notice of the outcome from the OPM to refer the complaint to the Citizens Review Panel. In closing, I would just like to say that this contract proposed is also a contract within the community and the department. The organizations that we serve and participate out to help the youth will be enhanced, and the trust that we have built and within the history in the past, we can build on and allow our officers and the community the peace of mind needed to build the best department in the state and nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next speaker we have here is Ketty Sully. Mr. Sully, I think you had donated time from 2 people. Is Holly Kirby here? Thank you. Is Norma Herrera here? All right, so you have 3 plus 2. You have 5 minutes, sir.
All right. So Kay Sully's my mom, which is the mother of David Joseph. I'm one of David Joseph's brother. I don't have any percentages or anything like that. I don't have anything written down, but I mean, I understand that they want this contract, and I know that everyone's in their giving seasons, given that Christmas is around the corner and all, but this is just one of those things that if you really want to be held accountable for everything that has happened in the past, you honestly have to sit there and think about what exactly has happened and how this contract is really gonna change what the fact that you're being held accountable. If you want to be held accountable, the fact that you're even asking for something like this is not being held accountable for everything that has happened. Because, I mean, if I want to be held accountable for something, then I know that I messed up. I know that I've done wrong. So automatically, I know that I can't sit there and ask for something knowing that what's been happening in the past has not been right. I mean, if you look at everything that's been going on in Austin, Austin's a great city. I mean, we have beautiful people. The environment is amazing. I mean, everything is great, but the people are shaky right now with their police department because we have a lot of uncertainty of what actual protection is going on here. Police officers are thinking about themselves and coming back before they actually think about the people that they're supposed to be protecting. And I mean, that just comes down to, at the end of the day, like, what are these officers doing it for? If you're gonna do it because you love the city and you love the people and you're doing it from your heart. Don't do it for a paycheck. Don't do it because, oh, this is the only job that I found, or I didn't, do it because this is what you really want to do. I mean, that's what real policing at the end of the day really is because you're willing to put your life and everything on the line because you love your community. But if you're thinking with a mindset of, oh, I have to make sure that I do this and do that, then it's no longer about the people, it's more about you. And I thought as a police officer, we got to think about the next person before you think about yourself. And it's like being on a basketball team or a football team. Automatically, you are held to a different standard. The coach is going to look at you different than any other person in that school because you are on that basketball team. So automatically, you're a police officer. You know you are held to a different standard than everyone else. So the way you carry yourself should be different than everyone else. And the fact that you're not being held accountable if someone did it, but you can do it just because you have a badge and, get away with something, we have to really sit there and think about, are we really in the right here? Are we really being held accountable? And, I mean, we just got to sit there and ask ourselves at the end of the day, like, where are we really doing here? That's it.
Mr. Kassar?
Sir, I just want to thank you and your mom for coming today and for sharing your thoughts with us. And I think I don't just speak for myself, but for, I'm sure, everyone at the city that we wish things were different. So thank you for coming.
Thank you. The next speaker that we have is Cindy Siegel. And then at the other podium, Ranjani Natarajan. Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Siegel and have proudly served the citizens of Austin as an Austin police officer for over 2 decades. I have also actively participated as a member of the bargaining team during the last 2 meet and confer negotiations. I'm proud to say that the APA has fulfilled their obligation and they have bargained in good faith through both of these sessions. We have bargained not only for the officers, but for the city and the citizens as well, trying to support a reasonable balance. During this bargaining session, a list of requested reforms were presented for our consideration. We carefully considered each, weighing what each would mean for officers and for the citizens of Austin. The first is the previously mentioned 180-day rule. This limits time to discipline an officer to 180 days from occurrence of a rule violation. We were asked to consider putting into the contract an exception to this time limit. We, as officers, do not want other officers being allowed to keep working in law enforcement capacity while breaking the laws they are sworn to uphold. The agreement reached between the city and the APA allows for the chief to discipline beyond this 180 days from occurrence if the alleged rule violation relates to criminal actions. This new agreement allows for the 180 days to start once an assistant chief or above becomes aware of the alleged violation. This allowance is not affected by whether or not criminal charges are filed. Currently, suspensions of 3 days or less may be automatically reduced to a written reprimand. The city and the APA agreed that certain classifications of offenses should not be downgraded. As such, it was agreed to put into the contract that suspensions resulting from a violation of the department's use of force policy or bias-based policing policy would be excluded from being reduced to written reprimands. Third, subpoena power by the Citizens Review Panel. This was a request that was not agreed on for a variety of reasons. The CRP's name identifies them as a review panel, as such, not an investigative unit. The OPM is part of the investigation with full access to the internal affairs case and under the proposed contract, the ability to ask questions. The CRP does not make recommendations on punishment and is not an entity that can subpoena witnesses and/or evidence. The fourth that I'm addressing is to allow misconduct to be considered equitably in the promotional process. This is something that is already in place. Under statute, the police chief has the right to consider prior discipline before making a promotion and can, in fact, pass over a promotional candidate for cause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ranjana Natraj, and I direct the Civil Rights Clinic at UT Law School. My students and I looked into civilian oversight into policing, delved deep, and here's what we found. It's pretty well established that civilian oversight of policing is critical for public safety, for racial justice, for economic justice. So what makes civilian oversight effective? You need at least a couple of things. The first thing is you have to have investigative powers for the civilians who are doing the oversight. Here's why civilian oversight is unique. It's the only people who are outside the police system and outside the city system who are truly independent and can oversee the police. And so when they are overseeing the police, they have to be able to subpoena and get all the data that they need. Data access is critical to actually looking and doing the oversight. If you can't get the data, you can't do oversight. We've found that across the country, when civilian panels have subpoena powers, they get the data. They rarely have to use the subpoena powers, but the fact that it's there is critical to getting the data they need to do investigations. Second, they usually have investigators. So civilian review boards have investigators who are separate from internal affairs investigators in order to independently investigate critical incidents as well as pattern and practices. So what civilian oversight panels can do is, and they've done this in Portland and New York, they can figure out how are our search policies, how are our investigative stop policies. They can look at patterns and problems outside of incidents. Our civilian review panel has done some great things here and has made some great recommendations to the chief. It would be great to get responses from the chief, but what we should be doing is being on the trajectory to strengthening civilian oversight, and that's what this new contract doesn't do. Once you finish investigating, you got to have more mechanisms for accountability. So the civilian panel has to have the ability to make recommendations, not just in a small subset of cases, but in all cases and in all patterns where they see problematic policing. And that's what gets us closer to what the Matrix report recommended, which is community policing and building trust, but also what we know is right, which is more effective policing, which is policing that doesn't sacrifice safety or racial justice or economic justice in order to produce particular public safety outcomes. So I'll stop with that. And the last thing I'll say is civilian oversight has even produced great insights into taser policies, pepper spraying. They can get down and dirty into the details of policing if we give them the powers to do it. Thank you.
Those were the speakers that, for the pre-dinner portion, had 3 minutes. We're now to 1 minute a speaker. Is Ray Collins here? And on deck will be Kevin Foster. When Kevin Foster comes up, is Kevin Foster here? Okay, when Kevin Foster comes up, you have some donated time from Sophia Cassini. Is Sophia Cassini here? Thank you. And also from Elizabeth Welliver. Okay, so Mr. Foster, when you come up, you'll have 3 minutes.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes?
I don't know if people who are out in the atrium realize that people have left and they can come in. Is it possible to let them know that?
If you're out there listening, We have extra seats in here. You can come in.
Thank you.
Mr. Collins, 1 minute.
Ready?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Ray Collins. I'm a medical editor, now retired. When I arrived in Austin, possession of 2 joints was a felony. One of the earliest things I noticed about Austin was that people with skin darker than mine went to state prison for 2 joints. My lighter-skinned acquaintances got probation for an ounce. At that point, I started paying attention. You've all received emails from me with, just the facts. And now I'll tell you my 50 years of Austin history. People of color are killed, beaten, and busted by the Austin Police Department in numbers far in excess of any of their alleged misdeeds and the proportion of the Austin population they represent. Starting with the first 10-1 election this year and this afternoon, that 50-year-old pattern I observed changes with your no vote on this police contract. Skipping forward from when I arrived in 1966, let's now move
your thought,
to,
Mr.
is that
Collins?
really all my time already?
It's only 1 minute, but you can finish your thought like in one breath.
Okay.
Is it people who want to donate time? Who wants to? What's your name? Would you please come down to the clerk and give her your name?
So how much more time?
I gave you an additional minute. You have an additional minute.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Skipping forward from when I arrived in 1966, let's now move to Elizabeth Watson's time as Austin's chief of police. There was a beatdown in East Austin, and Chief Watson expressed mild concern about that event. In response, large numbers of her officers retired, causing disruptions in policing Austin. When that time of disruption was past, APD was better for the absence of those officers. I bring this bit of history to your attention because when you vote no on this contract, there will be presently serving officers who are going to retire in order to cash out their accumulated leave, and that's going to cause disruptions in policing Austin. The pattern from Chief Watson's tenure is going to repeat, and APD will be a better police force. Fast forward for more years to when my wife and I attended church with Margot Frazier and were acquaintances. We voted for her for Travis County Sheriff. From my knowledge of Margot, I tell you tonight that if she couldn't make the office of the police monitor work, it is unworkable. For the record, I use a lot of Mediterranean oregano when I cook, so that's what I brought tonight.
Kevin Foster speaking. And I'd point out to you that we now have over 250 speakers. So I tell you that there are going to be people here between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning because we're doing applause. So if we could just go from speaker to speaker, I promise you at the tail end of this, there will be a lot of people that will be very thankful. We now come to, sir, Kevin Foster, who has 3 minutes. And on deck is Kenneth Thompson. Sir.
I have nice balanced comments, but this process is ticking me off. The police union leadership is represented at the negotiating table, is represented by staff, and now is represented in citizens' comments. So our comments are being shortened so that we can have police officers and leadership from the union come and further represent their position. So off the bat, this is kind of throwing me off. My name is Kevin Michael Foster. Meet and confer is broken. It pits police against the city. It makes doing the right thing subject to negotiation for benefits. What would it be like if professors would say, yes, we will grade fairly, but only if we get bonuses for attending faculty meetings? We would all be like the several hundred police officers who make over $100,000 a year in our city. One of the challenges of this process has to do with staffing. Council has chosen negotiators who have spent the better part of their careers working for the Combined Law Enforcement Association of Texas. So among our city negotiators, at least 3 members of the team have spent combined decades working for the self-described largest police union in the state of Texas that is, quote, the state's most powerful advocate for the rights of law enforcement professionals. In other words, the people's negotiators have spent their careers working for the other team. The process, compromised on top of broken, is the source of our current reality, one of the most highly compensated yet least accountable police forces in the country. Given the wage progression schedule that places an escalating burden on the city year by year, regardless of inflation or economy, it would be nice if we got some ironclad accountability in exchange for this fiscal irresponsibility. I see two options. One, vote no. Hit reset, rebuild our systems in more accountable ways that respect our police, respect our citizens, and respect our wallets. Or two, send your team back to the table. Have a little chat with your negotiators to see if they are able to rise to the occasion of representing our city and its people with the same vigor that their comrades on the other side of the table represent their positions. If they are up to the task, fine, send them back for a better deal. Regarding further negotiations, if the union chooses to walk away from one of the sweetest compensation packages in the country, they would do so to the detriment of everyday officers. But if they did, they would also create space for newfound flexibility in the city budget. I will walk away with pride in my council if you vote to end meet and confer and let the contract lapse. We deserve a better process, and good governance demands it. But if our best political opportunity is to send negotiators back to the table with renewed purpose and vigor and commitment to the people, then in that case, too, the city and its voting residents will be reasonably well served.
Thank you very much. Robin Schneider is the next speaker. Donating time to Robin Schneider is Crystal Schimpf. Is Crystal Schimpf here? Okay. You have 2 minutes, Ms. Schneider. And at the next podium would be Bishop Lands. Go ahead.
My name is Robin Schneider. I was not here for the famous all-night city council meeting that resulted in the birth of SOS. But I think tonight we're here for a famous city council meeting that hopefully will be the rebirth or maybe the birth of racial justice in this city with the beginning of the rejection of this contract. In my former life, I was actually an investigator of racial discrimination complaints. I had to talk to everybody who might have information about what happened and report all that information. I didn't just talk to the employee that was accused of discrimination and the other employees. I talked to the complainant. I talked to anybody else I could find and get any data I could find. This contract does not measure up to what we need in terms of investigation of racial discrimination complaints or police misconduct complaints. Before any of you were on council, I had 2 incidents within about 2 weeks with the Austin Police Department, where at the Millennium Youth Entertainment Complex and on the sidewalk of the convention center, I was told by APD officers that I could not exercise my free speech rights. And that pales in comparison to the kind of injustices that other Austinites have suffered at the hands of APD officers. This contract is not worth the extra money that we're going to have to pay. We could spend those millions more in so many ways that would really repair the fabric of this community, that would provide the kinds of services that we need for people who need mental health, for people who want parks and pools and places to go, for people who need substance abuse treatment. The oversight is just not robust enough. We need a full reset. And as an advocate for the 10-1 system, we wanted accountability for our city council and for the contracts that you enter into.
Thank you very
much. So please vote against this contract.
Thank you. Bishop Lands is speaking. And donating time to Bishop Lands is Julia Halpern. Is Bishop Lands here?
He's trying to get here.
Okay, that's fine. We'll just pass him for now, but we'll keep the slot here. Is Gus Pena here? Is Carly Rose Jackson here? Is
She may be outside.
Okay, and if I call your name and you're outside, just come on in and let the clerk know that you're here, and we'll come back. No one's missing the chance to speak. Is Anthony Walker here? Yes. So speaking after Anthony Walker would be Dusty Harshman. Is Dusty Harshman here? And you have some donated time from Samra Watkis? Okay, sounds good. Sir.
So how many minutes I got?
You have Anthony Walker, you have 1 minute.
You know what? We playing with fire tonight. And if we don't make the right choice, do the right thing, we all going to get burned. I didn't come out here to make friends, but I also didn't come out here to become public enemy number one. I support this contract. I support the police association. I'm going to tell you something. I understand a lot of people mad, angry, and frustrated. They got a right to be. But if you're not going to be proactive in the community where you're going to start making a difference, then you're going to be feeling the same way 5 years from now. You can combine Houston and Dallas Police Association together. When it comes to engaging, supporting the community, they don't even come close to Austin Police Association. So I'm going to ask you as a group to support this contract. But all those opposed, I understand they mean it because I was on the other side of the field 10 years ago. But at some point, they got to ask themselves, and I want you to ask them, when are they going to become proactive and get out there in the community to make a difference to those guys who's wearing SAG, to the guys who don't have trust in the police department? You got to be someone that's going to get out there in the gutter and make a difference. This is something I do, and they've been very supportive of me, and I'm going to ask you, if you really, truly want to make a difference, support this contract so we can continue to become proactive in making a difference in our community. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you. The next speaker would be Cassandra Champion. Is Cassandra Champion here? Is Lauren Ortel here? Is Candace Ayler here? Okay. Is Bill Bunch here? Okay. You'll be up next. And again, if you're outside, just work your way in, let the clerk know, and then I'll make sure that we call you. You had donated time from Samra Watkis.
Yes, again, she's just stepped out to feed the meter. I can do one without hyperbole, or I can do two.
I would do one without hyperbole. She has to be here to give you the 2 minutes.
All right. No hyperbole.
Or you could wait till she comes back.
That's okay. I've already ripped it up. I've heard a couple of things. I've heard that we have amongst the most lucrative contract in the state and potentially the country, top 5% perhaps in real wages. I've also heard that we are in the bottom 8%, perhaps bottom 6 among the Campaign Zero study, top 6% in wages, bottom 8% in accountability. It would behoove, I would suggest that it's in the interest of our police union to not walk away from among the most lucrative packages and potentially give a little to dig ourselves out of the bottom 8%. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. After Bill Bunch, Mandy Blott. Is Mandy Blott here? Okay, you'll be up next. Mr. Bunch.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, Bill Bunch. I've been a voter resident for 31 years. I work for Save Our Springs Alliance, do a lot of work here at City Hall. I'm speaking just for myself tonight, though. I think when you have the kind of homework and hard work that you've gotten from so many members of this community who care so much, you need to listen to the wisdom of the community. There's a reason we do crowdsourcing, Elon Musk and others, because that's where the best ideas come from. This is a huge amount of money. We shouldn't have to pay people top tier to live here. There's a premium by living in Austin. Most of us take a pay cut willingly to stay here because it's so nice. And if it's a police officer's priority to make the most money, then maybe they should go to another city. let's save our money for the community services that we desperately need, so we keep people out of jail and out of prison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did I see that Carly Rose Jackson has come into the room? Okay, you'll be at the next podium. Is Laura Hernandez here? So you'll have then 2 minutes when you speak. You have 1 minute, sir.
My name is Mandy Blott. I'm a psychologist and I live in District 1. Today you've heard about numerous changes to the contract that improve accountability and oversight, but we need to remember that these changes cannot replace the changes that are still lacking in the contract, including a full elimination of the 180-day rule, not just for criminal misconduct. As we've seen in the national uprising around sexual misconduct, bringing allegations into the public light is terrifying for many people, and it can take much longer than 6 months for a person to gain the courage to come forward. Today, you'll also hear that we should trust our chief and officers in the culture change they're creating. But even those with the best of intentions are fallible. We cannot rely on one person or on the department culture to ensure police accountability. We need larger systems in place. And finally, today you will hear about the terrible consequences that will come from ending this contract. But it is the APA, not you, who have threatened to leave the negotiation table if this version of the contract is rejected. Don't let them shift that blame to you. Today, we ask you to be brave, to stand up for us, your constituents, and to refuse to vote for any contract that doesn't give us the accountability and transparency that our progressive city expects from its public servants.
Ms. Blott, thank you very much. The next speaker that should be working their way up is Hope Dottie. Is Hope Dottie here? Okay. And I see you have donated time from Candace Herlin. Is Candace Herlin here? No? Is Mary Elizabeth here? No? So when you come up, you'll have 1 minute. Please proceed.
Hi, my name is Carly Rose Jackson. I'm here to speak on behalf of Texans for Accountable Government, and I'm currently living in District 2. And I'm here to ask the City Council to vote no on this agreement. I'd like to thank the Council for taking as much time as you have to really consider this contract, and ask that you take more time to make sure that the contract between the police and the city truly represents a cooperative and mutually beneficial relationship. It may seem like activists like myself stand in opposition to the police and see them as enemies. That is not true. I'm keenly aware that we ask the police to do the most difficult jobs. We ask them to deal with people when they are at their worst, and that is why we need true accountability from them. Accountability connects the community to the police who are protecting it. We in the community need to know if the people who are protecting us are okay. We need to know if they are dealing with the stresses of the job in a healthy manner. We can't do that if the police and their activities are kept separate from us behind an opaque blue line. When we keep the police separate from their community, they will intentionally or unintentionally see us as their enemy, as other. We need to foster mutual support between the police and the community, and that's what transparency and accountability will do. So I hope the City Council will vote no on this, because it does not do enough to open communication between police and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Did Cassandra Champion come back into the room? You'll be next at this podium here. Please proceed.
My name is Hope Doty. I'm on the board of directors for Indivisible Austin. We are a proud member organization of the Austin Justice Coalition, and we're citizen activists who live and work in Austin. We have a stake in this community. Most of our 10,000 plus Austin members look just like me, and let's face it, I'm terminally white. Most of the folks that look like me have one perspective of the police. We know, like I learned when I was growing up, to trust the uniform and the badge. But that's not the case in a lot of communities of color in Austin. Conversely, there's often a lack of trust in many of these neighborhoods. Until and unless every neighborhood in Austin has the same level of trust toward the uniform and the badge, we can't accept this contract. If we must have a contract, Austin needs a police contract that respects the needs of the people in all of our communities. Any future contract negotiation must include a diverse committee of citizens and activist groups. I urge you to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. And then coming up to the next podium would be Kate Bedicare. You'll come to the next podium. Donate your time to? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, would you let the clerk know, please? So in that case, then, it would be Rachel Manning. Is Rachel here? Manning? Rachel Manning? Oh, so you'll be up next. Please proceed.
Do I have 3 minutes?
You have 1 minute.
Okay. My name is Cassandra Champion. I'm a staff attorney at the Texas Civil Rights Project, where I work within our criminal justice reform program. In the 5 years that I've been there, we've received countless calls from individuals who have claims against officers for alleged misconduct. And so we know that it's not just a problem from that a few vocal activists have identified. We know that the perception of APD as unaccountable in this community is common. I would echo what others have said about the accountability still not being enough in this proposed contract. Despite the tweaks, if any suspension can be reduced to a written reprimand, it takes away our ability to look on paper at the concrete patterns that may evolve over time in officer behavior. Also, APD officers have committed infractions both on duty and off duty for which they have been disciplined, and then those are drastically minimized in the personnel file and in the information that we have access to as citizens. Second, the proposed contract, well, there we go. I urge you to vote no.
Okay, thank you. Hold on. Would you to give the clerk your name, please? You have an additional minute. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, second, the proposed contract doesn't allow for enough oversight, and by that, we've heard about that, but it doesn't allow for citizen review panels to initiate investigations. They still have limited access to information. They may be able to now watch the interviews, but they can't pursue information on their own. Still, all they have access to is what APD gives them, and that is a skewed perspective. If we want investigations to be fair and balanced, it requires more insight from people not mired in the very department that needs reform. And finally, if we want this city to be a true leader, another theme that you've heard, we must take concrete steps toward change and improvement. If you agree that these things you've heard about are indeed a problem, I urge you to work fearlessly and tirelessly with all of us in this room, not just a fraction of us, and build trust within the community. That change can happen now, and it can continue long term. We can wipe this slate clean and make sure we have a contract that reflects the values of everybody in this room, or absent a contract that the values are reflected in our policing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Monique Nobles here? Monique Nobles? Is number 25 has already spoken? Is Laura Correa here? Okay. And you have some donated time from Maxwell Johnson? Present, thank you. And Brant Bradley? Thank you. So you'll have 3 minutes when you speak. You have what, 1 minute, I think.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Adler, Austin City Council. My name is Rachel Manning. I live in District 1, and this is my first time testifying in front of City Council. In my professional life, I am a social worker, and I work with people who have been charged with criminal offenses in Travis County. This work has greatly shaped what I think about this contract and how we should move forward, because all of these people come to me as a result of interactions with the Austin Police Department. As a social worker, I think it's critical to look at the root cause of a problem and not rely on topical solutions. While not all of my clients have mental health diagnoses, nearly all of them are Black or brown. They are all poor. They lack access to resources such as affordable housing, transportation, and mental health care services. I oppose this contract for many reasons. I think accountability should be the first priority when it comes to public safety. I think our tax dollars are better spent creating community safety from the ground up by funding housing, easily accessible drug treatment programs, and job corps. And most of all, I think that when the police are the first responders to a mental health crisis.
Sorry, you have 2 people that have donated time to you, so you have 2 more minutes.
I don't have 2 more minutes worth of testimony, but So I believe that when the police are the first responders to a mental health crisis, we criminalize our family members, our neighbors, and our children instead of giving them the services that they rightly deserve. So let's fund something else. Let's make our budget reflect our priorities and our values. Let's promote service. Let's fund services that promote racial equity and community safety rather than an additional $80 million for the police over the next 5 years. I urge you to vote no.
Thank you. Ken Cassidy is on deck, and you have time donated from Joshua Mushnikov, thank you, and Matthew Myers. Okay, so you'll have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Good evening. I'm Officer Laura Correa. I've been an Austin police officer for almost 11 years now. I've been a resident of the city for longer than I want to admit, and that'll reveal my age. I'm going to go over a few of the reforms on this contract. First of all, number one is we're going to allow citizens to make complaints online or over the phone. If people were hesitant to make a complaint on a police officer, I believe this opens the door for them to hold us accountable for our actions without fear of them knowing who we are or if there was any of that inclination. This new contract allows for those citizens to make complaints online and anonymously. The Austin Police Department welcomes feedback and suggestions from the community, which is our mission to make this department better for the community it serves. Believe me, I believe this will be the number one issue of this contract, the number one opening the door for accountability and transparency, because I know for a fact that my girlfriend will probably call and make an anonymous complaint due to the fact that she receives multiple speeding tickets, and that's just because she's a bad driver. But, she'll want to hold somebody else accountable for that, I'm sure. So, secondly, we're going to allow, and I thought that was kind of funny. Is there a truth behind me or anything? Did anybody hold up a false? No lies? Okay, no, it is true. She is a bad driver. So, we're going to allow the police monitor to initiate investigations even without a citizen complaint. This contract provides the Office of the Police Monitor with greater ability to initiate investigations even when there is not a citizen complaint. Number three, we're going to stop permanently sealing the records related to police misconduct. The existing contract has 7 areas with regard to police misconduct that can be made public. This new contract has increased this to 9 areas that can be made public. Through this contract, we increase the number of recommendations that the panel can make and also have increased the number of recommendations that can become public. This contract makes it clearer what is public and what is confidential. This contract cannot supersede the current Open Records Act. And to end, like I've said before, I'm a citizen of Austin. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a District 9 resident. I urge you to vote yes on this contract. And it's not because it puts money in my pocket. It's because I love living here. I love this city. I hold myself accountable. I don't worry about, body cameras or the cameras in the vehicle or even the Peaceful Streets Project. I know they're going to hold me accountable. I hold myself accountable. I can't do that if I can't make a living. City taxes, the property taxes, they're killing me. And that's a problem with many people that are residents. People say cops don't live in this city. They do. Yeah, and that's the reason why I stay here. Just like Mike, who we talked about before, he could do great things and move somewhere else. And, I worry that we would lose those kinds of people in our department. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next speaker that we have will be Travis Wesley. No. On deck. Mr.
Good evening,
Cassidy.
Council. It's you hear a lot of contention here tonight. I actually respect the work that the Austin Justice Coalition do and the activists. We've worked with them on the policy for body cameras, and that last speaker that talked about mental health. I don't speak for the department, but I speak for a lot of officers. I agree with her. The first responders to mental health crises should not be police officers, but state law made it that way. And that's something that we will work with them on to get changed, because it's not our job to respond to a lot of these calls when it can be done by other professionals that have a lot more experience than Austin police officers. You've heard a lot of people talking tonight about the accountability. You know, we feel like we accommodated the city in what they asked for. We feel like there was one big item that they did not get, and that was subpoena power. There's questions by attorneys in the city whether we could even give them subpoena power with the way 143 is written. So that's another issue. I just strongly encourage you guys to vote for this contract tonight. This is something that we've worked on for over 11 months with the city. We bargained in good faith, and our officers deserve this. They live in a very dangerous world. This is my badge with a mourning badge over it. I haven't been able to take it off in over a month and a half because we continue to have police officers killed in this state at a very rapid pace. Some of them are car accidents. A lot of them are being shot or stabbed and killed. So our officers live with this on their badge every day and have for the last 2 months. So I encourage you to support our police officers and vote for this contract. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
Thank you.